or not. And I think that would depend on the nature and notoriousness of the incident. And it mostly would depend on how the person who came in trying to get a gun was acting. I think the goal here is to set standards so that gun dealers know that they should behave the way the most responsible gun dealer would behave. The most responsible gun dealer out there, if they know that the person who's trying to buy a gun from them is going to be at risk of suicide, they're of course not going to complete that transaction. There are unfortunately a small number, I think, a small number that would. And this is to put those irresponsible companies on the same legal footing as the responsible folks, the same financial footing as the responsible folks. Because right now there's a competitive advantage, a perverse one, for the least responsible companies to make the most sales.
You mentioned insurance earlier. So your representation here, what I just heard was that most gun owners in the state of Connecticut probably don't need this legislation because they do things right, but we need to enact this legislation for the few that don't. Is that fair representation, what you just said?
Of the sellers.
Sellers, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah. What I say? Did I say gun owners?
You say gun owners, but yes.
Sorry. Well, usually it's gun owners get attacked here, so bear with me. So sellers, okay. So, but you mentioned insurance earlier. If do the rest of the gun dealers, do you think the gun dealers in this state, if this passes, that we'll see an increase in their insurance because of the increased risk as an entity?
I don't know if they will or not. What I can say is that 9 other states have enacted this. New York was first among them. We have not seen the kind of catastrophic consequences that some have suggested here today. We've not seen a massive number of gun dealers going out of business. We've not seen it become difficult to obtain a gun in the state of New York. If you're a law-abiding person, you can still just as easily obtain a gun in the state of New York.
So you don't know whether or not insurance rates increase for the gun dealers in those 9 states?
I don't, but I can say that it was not at a significant enough level that it would impact the ability of somebody who wants to buy a gun to buy a gun.
Well, I'm more talking about the retailer themselves. Will an increase in insurance affect their ability to do business and their overhead?
The obvious answer to that is yes. An impact on the cost is going to impact on an ability to do business. But I don't think the kinds of cost increases that we're looking at from this legislation would have a substantial impact on the body of gun sellers. And I think that the quantity of gun sellers is going to look very similar after this is enacted as before. And as evidence for that, I would point to the 9 other states.
And as far as liability, what happens when a retailer doesn't actually engage with the individual? Like they make a sale online, for example?
Well, I think it would, again, depend on the nature of the product being sold. But I can give you an example of a sale online. State of Connecticut prohibits ghost guns. You can't legally buy a ghost gun in the state of Connecticut. You could go online right now to a website, a major seller of ghost guns. You could put in your information and attempt to purchase a ghost gun. One of the major ghost gun sellers, I logged onto their website this morning, said, get your ghost guns while you can. We encourage you to pay with crypto. If a company like that made online sales to a buyer in Connecticut where ghost guns are illegal, where that kind of sale would be illegal, and not only did that, not only made the sale, not only know where they were shipping it, shipped it to Connecticut, knowing all of that, but also encouraging ways to conceal it. Yeah, I absolutely think that that online seller should be held responsible.
I don't disagree. But I was thinking more of when, like a company like Amazon, for example, right? I mean, Amazon sells firearm industry products. They're a firearm industry member by this legislation. We would agree on that?
Yes.
Right? Because they sell things like holsters.
Yes.
Would a holster be a firearm accessory?
I believe it would, but I don't think that it is going to be something that is likely to be actionable under the statute because I don't think the circumstances under which holsters are sold or used would lend themselves to the kinds of harm contemplated by the statute.
We've outlawed guns here because of what they look like, So I mean, I wouldn't put it past it. And maybe you heard me say to somebody earlier, there's a lot of things that are firearm accessories, right? Would you agree? A flashlight designed to go on a firearm is a firearm accessory?
I would.
A red dot sight is a firearm accessory?
I would, and I don't think either of those things would be actionable unless they were sold, for example, with irresponsible language suggesting. And this is an actual example of firearms that were marketed as being urban sniper rifles. I think if you said this is the urban sight, use it against protesters to keep your business safe. Things like that, I think, could venture into the realm where accountability and liability could attach. But the mere sale of a Accessory, like the kinds you're describing, I think, if done responsibly, is not actionable under the statute.
I appreciate this because unlike some of the others here, I'm not a lawyer, so this information is helpful to me. But if I'm an 18-year-old person and I buy an aim point red dot sight for a rifle off of Amazon, and then I commit some heinous act like we've already heard about today, and I use that red dot sight because representations have been made in this committee on numerous occasions, and I don't disagree. A red dot sight makes you a much quicker shooter. There's no doubt about that. And something tragic happened, and we have no idea where the rifles came from, but we're able to determine that the red dot sight came from a company with deep pockets like Amazon. Could you file action and say, hey, they should have known that a red dot rifle should not be going to an 18-year-old buyer?
I think without more facts, no, you couldn't.
You couldn't. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. And if it helps, I'm not an attorney either, so it just shows how far you can go on this committee. Representative Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we're very glad you have. A few questions, Attorney Pacino, and I appreciate your testimony so far. I'll try not to double down on too many of the questions that have been asked already. I am also an attorney, just for fair warning for everyone out there who doesn't already know that. Who can file a lawsuit?
Generally, or under the bill before us today.
Just generally.
Generally, any harmed individual or government body, anyone harmed.
Yeah. So you don't even have to be a lawyer. You can file one on your own behalf. It's called pro se. It's just a fancy word for yourself. And often we hear in this committee and some others the danger of allowing people to file lawsuits. But ultimately, I think it's important to remember that literally anyone can file a lawsuit for any reason. It's ultimately up to a court and, if appropriate, a jury or other fact finder to decide if that lawsuit has merit. So I wanted to drill down on a couple other issues. With regard to insurance, we've heard from several witnesses today concerns that FFLs, excuse me, or other firearms industry members will not be able to obtain insurance if a measure like this passes in Connecticut. Have you seen any evidence in any of the other states that have passed similar measures that such individuals or businesses have not been able to obtain insurance?
No.
And obviously insurers, they defend against lawsuits, or liability insurers defend against lawsuits. They also can pay judgments or settlements as appropriate. Do you have any knowledge about what else insurers can do for their insureds?
Insurers can have a great ability to determine the business practices of an insured entity. It's a primary mechanism in which industry safety standards and other standards are improved, because industries will react to the insurers, because at the end of the day, the insurance companies have a lot of information to know the kinds of bottom line actions, what kinds of behavior to incentivize, what kinds of behavior to disincentivize. And that as a whole raises public safety.
I think that's really important information. Insurers play a vital role in maintaining safety in various industries, helping individuals and businesses do the right things, not only for their own bottom line, but for the safety of everyone around them. And also, if they do the right things, probably reducing their insurance rates. So I think that's very important to keep in mind. I was curious also, another concern I've heard is that this industry is being singled out on its own or unduly. Are there any other industries that are subject to similar measures?
Oh, absolutely. Private rights of action are typical, including ones that are industry specific. Telecom industry, the financial services industry, the media industry, the credit reporting industry. I mean, the list goes on, but this is not an uncommon thing.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know as well. And one issue that came to mind, again, as a lawyer, about the parts and accessories issue is the issue of causation in a potential lawsuit. Not to put you on the spot, but what is causation?
So causation is going to be a standard that says that the harm that was suffered can be attributed to the individual who's been accused.
Okay, so in other words, in a lawsuit that was brought for a firearms part or accessory under this law, a plaintiff would have to prove that the alleged wrongdoing under this measure, so the sale of the holster or the part or the sight, actually was a proximate cause, meaning a substantial factor in the injuries. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is.
So it seems to me that for a lot of firearms parts and accessories, that would simply be inapplicable. I don't know how you would prove that a holster, or the wrongful sale of a holster, which I'm not sure if there's a circumstance where that would be unreasonable to sell a holster, for instance, directly caused someone to be harmed. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Yeah, to me that seems a pretty significant protection for the sellers or industry members who might be marketing parts and accessories. There are certainly parts and accessories that I think I could call to mind. For instance, bump stocks or certain braces or other things that I would be particularly worried about being used in an incident that might be applicable under this law. But there's a lot of parts and accessories that seem to me that just wouldn't I can't imagine being involved in any lawsuit. Would you disagree with that?
No, I agree.
Yeah, that seems a significant protection that is an essential part of our tort system. Causation, both but for causation and proximate cause, meaning that the wrongdoing has to be a substantial factor in the harm. Those are significant protections and essential elements built into our tort system that I think would ameliorate a lot of the concerns that we're hearing today. So I appreciate your answers and all the information you've contributed. And thank you for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Kissel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple quick inquiries. Earlier, a nice gentleman from the Connecticut Citizens Defense League opined with me that we agree that we think that Connecticut, in totality, when you look at all our gun laws, is probably one of the top 3 states as far as strict regulations. Where would you, in your opinion, since you have a lot of knowledge regarding this area of law, where would you put Connecticut?
I would put it actually exactly at number 3 behind California and New Jersey.
Okay, great. But you say New Jersey instead of Illinois.
I
I
would,
thought
yes.
Illinois was in the top 3, but you're saying New Jersey.
I am, yes.
Okay, well, still number 3, which means, I think we're doing plenty. The other thing, though, in line with our good colleague, Representative Howard, who's all about public safety since he's entered the workforce and probably even beyond that, earlier than that. He had actually opened or opined upon an example that caused some things to, if we go down this path, we're going to have more litigation rather than less, because there's going to be more possibilities for lawsuits. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, and the example that he used was a distraught individual, and I don't know if the individual was responsible for the family dying or just felt remorse because his family got killed in a car accident. I don't know what it is. But we had also heard, I believe it was the lady with the torn meniscus, that guns are used for suicides far more than in violent crimes. And we do have a huge unspoken problem with suicides in the nation. And Connecticut is no different than any other state. Are you aware of any lawsuits against gun manufacturers and gun sellers because of a suicide?
I am, yes.
And do you think that if we went down this path, there would be more litigation regarding that?
I think my hope is that with enacting this litigation, because of actions of dealers who are put on notice, as well as the actions of insurance companies setting standards, that we would have fewer such tragedies and therefore fewer such circumstances. But I can tell you about one of the circumstances I know where there was a lawsuit that was brought based on a suicide.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
There was a mother who had a daughter who was in a suicidal crisis. The mother calls up a gun dealer and says, "My daughter is coming to your shop. She's going to try to buy a gun. Do not sell to her. She's suicidal." She bought the gun. She killed herself with it. Now, I think,
How old was the girl?
uh,
Was
I,
she, she
I-
couldn't have been a minor, right?
no, she was an adult.
Okay.
But the point is that the dealer knew they'd gotten this phone call, don't sell to this woman. And they still made the sale anyway. And that's a situation where, yes, I think the family that lost that child should have a path to justice.
I could almost come up, and once upon a time, I was in private practice. I work for a corporation now, and I haven't been in private practice probably for 22 years. But back in the day, I would bring lawsuits, appeared in court, and, would come up with creative ideas if I thought a wrong had been done. So one time someone was maligned through a bad credit report. I actually brought a products liability action in federal court against Dun and Bradstreet. And believe me, it was a Hail Mary pass, but we got offered a substantial amount of money that my client turned down, and then we had a decision against us. But it was novel, and we took it all the way to a decision by the court. Jose Cabranes was the judge. I will always remember that, down in New Haven Federal Court. So creative attorneys can come up with creative ideas. I guess the concern, you painted you showed an example where someone had actual knowledge. That's one thing. And we have a list of individuals that if they commit certain crimes, we go too close to actual physical assaults on human beings, whether it's stalking, whether it's assault, that we say they're not really worthy of having the ability to own a firearm, even though we have Second Amendment rights. But we've determined that the link between their past bad behavior, convicted behavior, whether it was a plea bargain or a conviction after trial, is too close to let them have this dangerous instrumentality. And that's been upheld. So there's certain, so it's not like crying fire in a crowded theater. Like your right to free speech is not unlimited, your right to own a gun is not unlimited, but it's a constitutional right. And therefore the scrutiny on government action must be much higher. And I think that it's really like the poor ugly stepchild of the other constitutional rights. It gets beat around. And only recently have we seen it become fleshed out a little bit. That's just my 2 cents, my humble opinion. My concern is once we get into this realm of suicide, now we're not talking about clear, bright line tests where did someone do the correct background check and does it meet these criteria? My friend and colleague, the good ranking member from the House, Representative Fishbein, said North Carolina, South Carolina, sort of not as clear on stalking. Ours seems much wider in its description. And are they in alignment? Do we want to go down that path? And I think that's a legitimate concern, right? I loved his sort of like offhand suggestion that, hey, if the crime has anything to do with hurting another human being, we'll just have a catch-all and we could sort of figure that out. And it's easier to figure that out. And I sort of agree. Whether we want to go down that path or not, you're always going to bump up against where the line is. But do you have any concerns whatsoever that once we get into a really subjective area, that I can't do a background check on you? I can't. We'd like to think, I mean, people like to say, oh, what's the bill about? Just read the title of the bill. With all due respect to my wonderful friends on the other side of the aisle, they are master great title. They're very for me to vote against, but when I read the language, it's a terrible bill, right? So you can't really judge a book by its cover. You can't judge a bill by its title. And I can't tell what you're going to do with a gun just by looking at you. So in your example, when the mother called and said, my daughter's distraught, all right, more than a red flag, that's a direct communication. But if you're going to start going down a realm where I'm going to have to start being a mind reader, if I'm selling a lawful item, to know what you're going to do with that, I don't see where the lawsuits end. Don't you have any concerns about that being a sort of a wide open-ended no barrier at all?
I don't. And there's 2 reasons for that. The first reason is that there are already very, very significant and effective barriers to litigation against the gun industry, such that we see very few lawsuits against the gun industry. One of the very few cases that goes through to a large settlement is the Soto case following the Sandy Hook shooting. That's an exception. not the rule, because there are a lot of structural barriers that prevent those kinds of cases from being brought in this industry, as opposed to some of the other industries that you noted in your example. It is a lot easier to bring cases in other spaces, and the right number of cases is a balancing, the right amount of civil liability is a balancing, the right amount of accountability is going to be a balancing, and we are very far out of whack now. So that's point one. Point two is that I think this legislation as drafted is a good book once you get past the cover. And it has protections in place that are going to make it so those kinds of frivolous suits are not brought. And in a case where there's never-ending and frivolous lawsuits, there are other protections like the availability of sanctions. And so I think the concern, while not coming from nowhere, is misplaced as to the specific piece of legislation and this area of the law and of civil litigation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Fishbach for a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other areas that you say are controlled in this fashion were what?
The examples I gave were telecommunications, the media industry, financial services industry, credit reporting.
Okay, so the telecommunications industry, how are they regulated that would be in line with this?
So those examples I was giving were examples where there are private rights of action that are created by statute as to a specific industry. So in the telecom industry, I was thinking of the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which is a statute that allows for a private right of action against companies that are using auto dialers and other mechanisms to mass reach consumers in an inappropriate way.
Okay, the financial industry?
There's the Truth in Lending Act, which is going to require the disclosure of terms of a loan and allow for private right of action if those are violated. And then the Fair Debt Collection Act, which provides standards under which debt can be collected, what's reasonable and unreasonable, and allows for private rights of action for unreasonable efforts to collect debt.
So it's your representation that those laws are in line with what's here today?
Yes, as well, what I offered these for was as being statutes that provide for a private right of action that is industry specific. And yes, both of those are, all
Okay.
three of those are.
So you agree that a firearm accessory could be a holster?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go back where we started originally, and we have this transaction down in Georgia, lawful transaction, and the gun ends up in the possession of somebody in Connecticut who, let's just say, intends bad act, right? It was an illegal transfer to the individual in Connecticut. Now that individual has purchased a holster, a firearm accessory. Now, under this legislation, it requires the purveyor of firearm accessories to put in reasonable controls to make sure that to prevent, and I'm looking at line 27, prevent the sale or distribution of a firearm industry product, which the holster would be, to a person prohibited from possessing a firearm under state or federal law. So now that individual takes their illegally possessed handgun and they put it in their holster that they lawfully purchased, and they commit a mass shooting. Isn't the holster seller liable?
No, I don't
They're
think so.
not. They're insulated.
I do not believe that they would be liable under any scenario based on your fact pattern as you
But
laid out.
as a lawyer, the argument is, I mean, if I was representing the family, I mean, but for the possession of the holster, the firearm would not have been trafficked to, or would not end up at the place, and the person wouldn't have done it, right? It's right in the law. It's a firearm accessory.
Well,
And you, seller, did not put in reasonable controls to make sure that this mass shooter didn't end up with the holster. It's exactly right in line with the language.
the causation standard would be the approximate causation standard rather than a but-for causation standard. I can break down what that means, but it's not any little thing that in the butterfly flapping its wings scenario could have contributed to the action. It's having been substantial enough for that action to be attributable to the harm. So I can't imagine, if we're talking about holster sellers, a scenario where there would be liability that would attach. I can invent one and it's going to sound silly. But if somebody designed a holster, for example, to take illegal guns, so this is the Glock switch machine gun holster, marketed as such, has a special catch-all where you can keep spare Glock switches or something. I mean, this is silly, but that kind of scenario where somebody's selling that sort of product, I think maybe you could think about liability there. But if somebody's simply selling a holster, has no reason to believe anything else other than that, they just made the sale of a holster, I don't see how you could have liability.
I think you're proving the point. The individual who sold the firearm to begin with had no reason to believe. So
Well,
I
if the
understand.
original person who sold the firearm had no reason to believe for unlawful sales and had procedures in place to prevent unlawful sales, then there's no liability under this law either.
Well, they all have procedures to prevent illegal sales. But the scenario that I gave you, the firearm ended up in Connecticut by an illegal transfer. This didn't go through a gun store. Well, it went through a gun store originally, right?
Right, and if that
So-
original seller did something wrong,
I
then
will,
potentially.
one moment, I will just remind you all that there are folks listening, both here in the room and on television, and it helps if a question is asked, completed, and then an answer is provided and completed. You may proceed.
I didn't know if you.
No, I apologize, please.
No, I'm done. So we're good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that was effective. Uh, th- Thank you. Thank you very much. Comment or question from other members of the committee? Comment or question from other Representative Quinn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just diving back into the insurance issue for a moment. Your testimony before was that you weren't aware of any manufacturer company in a state that had a similar law being denied insurance. But have the rates gone up because now they're potentially exposed to greater risk?
I don't have that information, but what I can say is that any increase in rates has not been reflected in an inability of companies like this to stay in business. So while I'm not speaking to the specific P&L impact, what I am saying is that on an industry-wide basis, there has not been an impact that is going to be something that would prevent consumers from getting a product that they want to buy. So a responsible person who wants to buy a gun legally in the state of New York, where this law has been on the books, can buy a gun in the state of New York, notwithstanding any insurance impacts.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Comment or question from other members of the committee? Comment or question? Seeing none, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Rachel Connor.
Good afternoon, Senator Winfield, Representative Staffstrom, Senators Flexer and Godker-Wilcox, Representative Fazino, Senator Kissel, and Representative Fishbein, and distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Rachel Connor. I'm the former state representative for the 149th District, and I'm here today to testify in support of House Bill 7042, an act concerning implementation of the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act. We're fortunate here in Connecticut to have strong gun violence prevention laws, but we know that there's more that can be done to make sure that guns don't fall into the wrong hands. House Bill 7042 requires gun manufacturers, distributors, sellers, and others to establish and abide by reasonable controls to help ensure that firearms do not end up in the hands of straw purchasers, gun traffickers, and others who are prohibited from possessing firearms. This will help prevent gun crimes and make Connecticut residents safer. In addition, excuse me, current federal law provides unusual protections for and makes it very difficult to sue the gun industry. Consequently, many victims of gun violence don't get justice. Civil lawsuits against gun manufacturers and dealers with a history of irresponsible behavior provide accountability by allowing those harmed by misconduct to sue and potentially recover from those responsible. Roughly 90% of crime guns are sold by just 5% of firearms dealers, whose lax practices endanger our communities. Irresponsible marketing can put weapons of war in the hands of dangerous individuals without liability consequences for the manufacturers. Holding manufacturers and dealers accountable for their actions will reduce the number of firearms that are illegally flowing into our cities and towns, and will help to reduce the incidence of community gun violence across Connecticut. I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and your testimony. Are there questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you again for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Edward Rando, who will be followed by Richard Souza. Edward, welcome. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Ed Rando. I am partner in Ron's Guns in East Lyme, Connecticut. My father opened Ron's Guns in 1974. The gun shop is still active in its 50th year. In 2023, November, my father passed away. Myself and another gentleman had purchased the shop from him prior to his passing. At that time, we had to reconcile his books for the last 50 years. And we determined that in that 50-year period, we had sold roughly 1 million plus guns. In that 50-year period, we've had 3 instances of, I guess, certain issues. One being a gentleman coming in the shop, looking at a handgun, whacking my grandfather with it, and out the door he went. Another, a troubled individual purchased a firearm and committed suicide, and the third the same. My point there is that criminals do not come to our shop to buy firearms. We have stringent regulations in Connecticut that we have to abide by as FFL dealers, not only in the state of Connecticut, but through the ATF and the federal government. So again, this particular law that I'm opposed of, this 7042, will do nothing but eliminate the opportunity for Connecticut consumers to purchase firearms. And how will that happen? I've been an insurance representative for 40 years. I know that if this bill passes, we will not be able to purchase liability insurance, product liability insurance. I've been writing the insurance policy on Ron's Guns for 40 years. That policy, when I wrote it in year 1, was $5,000. Today, that policy is $20,000. Again, there's inflation in there. I understand that. But a lot of it is some of the regulation that has been implemented in the state of Connecticut over the course of the years, which require insurance companies to make changes and, again, charge accordingly. So I truly feel that if this bill passes, insurance will become unaffordable for most gun stores. It's getting to that point right now at $20,000 a year for, and again, we're not a large shop at all. So again, I oppose this bill, and I think it will hurt the Connecticut consumer when it comes to purchasing firearms. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and your testimony. Are there questions or comments from members of the committee? Representative Howard.
Thank you, Senator. Hi, Ed. Thanks for being here. I just want to say, to tell you, I knew your dad. My very first personal firearm came from him. My parents bought it for me in 2003 as a graduation gift from the academy. And I went to pick it up, and he kept me in there for a little over an hour. And I remember it well. My dad used to say, hey, when an old man's talking, you just keep quiet and soak up the wisdom. So I took that opportunity. Daddy was a great man. So I just want to thank you for being here and the job that you're doing. You take, before you leave, you have an interesting position, because you heard me ask other people about this insurance thing. And you're an insurance agent by trade. And then of course this gun store that you inherited, but you're sure even writing your own policy, you're going to have major problems.
I would think so, yes. I would definitely think so. I believe so, yes.
And without this legislation today, right? Because this piece of legislation doesn't exist. This is a bill. It's not a law. So do you sell guns to people illegally?
No.
Do you sell guns that you have any indication they were going to use to hurt themselves or hurt anybody else?
No.
And besides your good conscience, which I know you have, why don't you do that?
Because that's not the right thing to do.
Well, that's your good conscience. But do you think that without this
And
legislation,
I mean, we have, like I said, we have regulations on the books that don't allow us to do it.
right? And if you did it and it was, and something happened, do you think you could be sued now?
Most definitely.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you again for being here. Thank you,
Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you again for your time and your testimony. Next, we will hear from Richard Souza, who will be followed by Jeremy Stein, who will be followed by Margaret Donovan. Welcome, Edward. The floor is yours. Is Edward here? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Edward. Richard, it's your turn. I apologize. I'm so sorry, Edward. I got to use my pen to cross names off. I apologize. Richard, welcome. The floor is yours. I'm sorry for making you walk back and forth. Thank you for
Okay, I
coming.
need the exercise.
Thanks for the good humor.
All right, good afternoon. My name's Richard Souza. I'm from East Hartford, testifying today, March 12th. I support the following bills: HB 7194, HB 7070, and SB 1441. And I oppose HB 7042 and HB 7137. First, with regard to the bill about removing the duty to retreat in a house of worship, I'm telling you right now that I will never do that. I'm a Christian. The last command that our Lord gave to us the day before he was crucified was that we carry the sword, the same state-of-the-art military weapon that the Roman soldiers carried, and that we use it in a righteous manner to defend not only ourselves, but the innocents who were unable to protect themselves. Today's equivalent would be an M16 or an M4 assault rifle, because that's what our military uses. I carry a sidearm with me everywhere I can, and doubly when I go to church. Should the unthinkable happen, I can assure you that I will be running towards the danger, not away from it. Everything we know about mass shootings has taught us that maniacs like large crowds of defenseless people, and early intervention saves lives. In my written testimony, I described 2 church shootings in Texas. Compare the body count when there was early intervention to when there was not. With regard to the bill that wants to disqualify someone from receiving a pistol permit if they have a conviction in another jurisdiction, I want you to consider this. When I was a boy, there was a guy that was a real troublemaker. He was arrested and jailed 29 times in Georgia and Alabama for unlawful assembly, inciting to riot, breach of peace, disobeying a police officer, etc. His name was Martin Luther King Jr. I guess the Democrats who wrote this bill wouldn't want someone who did jail time in another jurisdiction, like Reverend King, to have a pistol permit in Connecticut. There's a lot of iniquity, not just inequity, in our legal and justice system. Why do you want to introduce more? I'm also against the creation of a merchant category code for firearms or ammunition retailers. It's illegal for our federal government to form a gun owner registration list like the German Nazis did. But it's not illegal for them to buy data from private companies. This bill gives our state and federal governments a backdoor gun owners list, a complete violation of our Fourth Amendment right. I saved the worst for last. HB 72 is a blatant slap in the face to honest firearm owners in this state.
Mr. Souza, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your time has expired. Can you please summarize? And
Okay, I just wanted to say that your own research, it showed that most of the crimes that are done in the state, it's all repeat offenders, okay? For the most part, the gun crimes,
thank you.
okay?
Thank you for your time and your testimony. Are there questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you again for your testimony. Next, we will hear from Jeremy Stein, who will be followed by Margaret Donovan, who will be followed by Stacy Mayer.
Thank you, Vice Chair Flexer, Chairman Winfield, Chairman Representative Staffstrom, Ranking Member Senator Kissel, and Representatives Fishbein, and distinguished members of the Joint Committee on Judiciary. My name is Jeremy Stein, and I am the Executive Director of States United to Prevent Gun Violence. And for those members who don't know me already, I'm also a Connecticut resident. This is a bill that would, I'm testifying in support of House Bill 7042. This is a bill that would permit the filing of a civil action against a firearm industry member who fails to exercise reasonable control over the firearm industry products. And it clarifies decades of law and ambiguity that the courts have struggled with due to the Federal Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, also known as PLACA. which is a bill that grants immunity to the firearm industry members, even if they are otherwise legally responsible. The firearm industry is the only industry in America that has afforded such wide sweeping immunity from civil liability, which is especially troubling because their products cause such harm to over 120 Americans every day. Firearms, as you all know and have heard, are the leading cause of death for children under the age of 18 in the United States. And while Connecticut has some of the strongest and most effective gun laws in the country, which allow for the criminal prosecution of violators of those laws, there's very little accountability on the civil end for the gun industry, for manufacturers and sellers of those firearms that may be civilly liable for causes of harms to victims of those same crimes. Our system in the United States allows for punishment of criminals, but also allows for victims of wrongdoing and negligence to seek redress in our courts in an attempt to be made whole by the filing of a lawsuit against those responsible. And there's plenty of precedent for this in the past of people who have been wronged who have been allowed to file lawsuits, and then sometimes either won or the firearms industry or government settled. And according to the Duke Center for Firearms Research, where they studied a 5-week period in 2022, there was they looked at millions of dollars in settlements and judgments over a 5-year period of time. And some of those cases that we know about, which involved finding people civilly responsible, included Sutherland Springs mass shooting, the Charleston mass shooting, the Parkland mass shooting, and of course, the Sandy Hook shooting, which you're all very familiar with. Even our Supreme Court in the Sandy Hook case, in their opinion, recognized the difficulty that the federal courts have when faced in trying to distill a clear rule around PLACA. So this law, 7042, would help to distill a clear rule, as the Connecticut Supreme Court suggested, and would allow a clear path for victims and families to be compensated for a loss that they could never really be compensated for. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about this bill.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Jeremy, thanks for joining us. Seeing you.
Appreciate it, Steve. Good to see you.
All right, next, we're going to be joined by Margaret Donovan, who is going to have Laja Karjika come up with her as well, I believe.
Hello? Okay. Hello, distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee. Margaret couldn't make it today. She had a conflict. But my name is Laya Kurjak. I'm a sophomore at Newtown High School and a member of Junior Newtown Action Alliance. I'm here today to testify in support of HB 7042, a bill concerning the implementation of the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act. I joined Junior Newtown Action Alliance to be an advocate for my community that has been irreversibly hurt by a senseless mass shooting. I've seen the effects of the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting tragedy on the families who live near me, families who lost their children, innocent children who lost their lives, community members who lost their friends, and students who lost their childhood. No one in our nation, especially children, should live in fear of getting shot and killed on a daily basis, yet countless Americans have been killed or injured in the streets, homes, schools, malls, concerts, businesses, hospitals, highways, places of worship, grocery stores, parades, and nightclubs. Too many lives have been irrevocably changed by gun violence. I am angry and disappointed that so many members of Congress have blocked common sense legislation that would ensure that guns are no longer the leading cause of death for children and teens. I want to live in a nation that loves its children more than guns. As a daughter and older sister to 3 younger siblings, a friend, and a Connecticut citizen, I am here to urge the Connecticut General Assembly to do more to protect members of my family and community, and you can do so by passing HB 7042, to hold the gun industry accountable for the violent gun crisis in our nation. Because Congress passed a bill in 2005 to give the gun industry a special civil liability shield, the gun industry is not incentivized to safely distribute firearms, as there are little to no repercussions if they don't. Instead, they profit from distributing guns irresponsibly, as they market guns to children and minorities to pursue their any guns to everyone, everywhere agenda. Elected officials must stop incentivizing the gun industry to make unsafe decisions to line their pockets. HB 7042 will hold the manufacturers and distributors accountable for the harm caused by guns in Connecticut and allow Connecticutians who have been harmed by the unsafe use of firearms to take legal action against the gun company that put a gun in the hands of the perpetrator. This is a bill crafted to protect Connecticut citizens from harm by holding the firearm industry accountable for their weapons sold to straw purchasers or when a household item malfunctions in a way that makes it dangerous to people around it. I urge you to make protecting Connecticut children the #1 priority by supporting HB 7042 to provide an opportunity for their families impacted by gun violence to pursue justice in the courts. Thank you for your time and considering my testimony.
Thank you. First time testifying?
Yeah, I'm nervous.
Good. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time with us. And I know you missed a day high school today to be here. So
Yeah.
appreciate you sticking with us.
Mhm.
Thank you. Next up will be Stacy Mayer.
Tough to follow that. Distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Stacy Mayer. I'm a resident of West Hartford, where I've lived with my family since 2006. I'm currently the Director of Advocacy, Policy, and Outreach for Connecticut Against Gun Violence and have been a volunteer in the gun violence prevention movement for many years. I'm testifying in strong support of HB 7042, an act concerning implementation of the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act. I'm also testifying in support of HB 7137 and in opposition to SB 1441, HB 7070, and HB 7194. My testimony on the latter 4 bills is included in my written submission, so today I want to focus on HB 7042. In this country, we often rely on external incentives to ensure that players in a variety of industries behave responsibly. One of these behavior-shaping forces is the threat of a lawsuit and the potential financial impact of an unfavorable verdict. Unfortunately, this is not an option when it comes to the firearms industry. Current federal law shields gun manufacturers and distributors from legal actions against them, robbing gun violence victims of a chance at justice and largely removing the incentives for gun industry members to exercise care. HB 7042 creates a standard of behavior to which gun industry members must adhere and allows for civil actions against them if they do not. Gun manufacturers, distributors, sellers, and others must establish and abide by reasonable controls to help ensure that firearms do not end up in the hands of straw purchasers, gun traffickers, and others who are prohibited from possessing firearms. When that is allowed to occur, these guns flood our communities and contribute to the devastating impact of gun violence on Connecticut's cities and towns. To be clear, HB 7042 does not touch the responsible gun owners in Connecticut, nor does it impact the many law-abiding gun manufacturers and dealers. As we've discussed already today, we know that the majority of crime guns comes from a very small number of manufacturers and dealers. This bill simply permits lawsuits to be filed against those irresponsible bad actors. Those who already take care in their manufacturing, distributing, marketing, and selling of firearms will remain beyond the reach of HB 7042. Preventing gun violence is a complex task that requires a multi-pronged approach. One prong is legislation, and I'm proud that Connecticut is a national leader for gun safety laws and a model for other states to follow. I think we've established we're at number 3. Our strong patchwork of common sense gun laws saves lives, but we can do better. HB 7042 is a missing piece of that patchwork. Similar laws that focus on liability for gun industry members are associated with decreased gun trafficking and other gun crimes in the cities and states that have implemented them. This bill will keep our communities safer, and when irresponsible practices lead to injury and harm, it will allow access to justice for the victims. I urge you to support HB 7042. Thanks for your consideration and for listening to my testimony.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Representative Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your testimony. You did say in your opening remarks that you were against 1441. And I'm just, if I could inquire.
Yes,
your
hang on,
reason-
sorry. Let me just flip my notes to make sure that I,
Sure.
you can read a little bit more in my written submission, but basically, this bill includes serious firearms offenses in the list of offenses eligible for discretionary transfer of a juvenile to the regular criminal docket. We oppose stiffer penalties for juveniles. The way that our current penal code is set up, this is not the reason why there is gun crime. This bill, we don't believe is an effective way to reduce gun violence. We know that there are other evidence-based approaches that do make an impact on reducing gun violence. And so that's why we are in opposition to that bill.
Just when you say we, you're speaking on behalf of your organization?
CAGV, yes.
Okay, so it's the position of the CAGV that a juvenile, under this law, someone over the age of 15 who is in possession of a firearm that the serial number has been erased from and that they have threatened someone with, that it's improper for there to be a discretionary transfer to adult court?
I think that would be a fact-based inquiry for the court.
Well, that's what this law asks for. This
Right,
law,
I-
discretion says that the judge, an application can be made.
Correct.
The judge is supposed to look at, it says the court shall consider any prior criminal or juvenile offenses committed by the child, the seriousness of the offenses, any evidence that the child has an intellectual disability or mental illness, the availability of services in the docket for juvenile matters to serve the child's needs. So I'm just trying to figure out the opposition, because my understanding is that CAGV is Connecticut Against Gun Violence, and here we have a juvenile, which, I mean, just possession of the firearm by someone under the age of 18 is illegal on its face, right? Why your organization would find that court, that a judge should not, under any circumstances, look at that case for transfer?
I don't think we're saying under any circumstances. I think, again, it's fact-based, and I'm not prepared to testify beyond what I already have in my written testimony.
I understand. I just, I'm trying to figure out, I thought CAGV was against gun violence, and now we have a juvenile with possession of a firearm, because, a juvenile convicted of that crime, the maximum sentence is 3 years, and at 18 that conviction gets erased. So I'm trying to figure out why, as an organization, that is,
I think
it
it's,
seems
I know, I think
hypocritical,
it's,
actually.
of course, we are against gun violence. It's in our name, it's in our mission. I think, again, you're getting into a factual situation that would be determined on a case-by-case basis. I'm not comfortable making a blanket statement about any case that would come up that would fall within that. Like I said, I'd like to just leave my testimony that we oppose. And if you have any other questions, I'm sure we can discuss it later, but I'd like to stick to that today, please.
No, I understand. I'd like to take representations to the committee with some level of credibility. I mean, you do acknowledge that this only has to do with, it says in line 26, serious firearm offenses. So I don't know, the hypocrisy, anyway. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Fishbein, you're allowed to ask questions and you're allowed to comment, but I don't think we need to make comments like that. I think that was a little, I don't often admonish on this committee, but I think that was a little over the top, sir. Further questions or comments from the committee? Representative Trubisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in. If with regard to Bill 7042, what would you have a firearm manufacturer do that they are not currently doing?
I think we've kind of covered this a little bit in the previous testimony, and I know we have some additional lawyers who will be testifying, but I think the point of the bill is to create a standard of care that a manufacturer would need to adhere to. And then if they do not, then this is a path, an access to justice pathway for someone who is harmed down the line.
Okay, and in that standard of care, what would you want them to do that they're not currently doing?
So if I could look back at the wording of the statute. So a reasonable control would be to prevent the sale or distribution of a firearm industry product to a straw purchaser, firearm trafficker, et cetera, et cetera. And so conversion, I mean, we've kind of covered all of these different points. So I would expect, you know, for an industry member to have these reasonable controls and to abide by them.
Okay, well, I apologize. I was in another committee meeting. I just got
Don't worry,
here.
I know, it was a
So-
busy morning at the
So
LOB.
that's why I'm asking you, is there something that manufacturers are not currently doing that you think this bill would force them to do?
I think that there is a small number of manufacturers who perhaps do not abide by reasonable controls such as this, and who don't always take care in the way that they distribute and the way that their firearms are manufactured. And so again, this would just create a standard of care to which they would need to abide.
Okay, you said in the way that they are manufactured. Are you suggesting that they are manufactured with defects in them?
I'm not, I mean, I guess that's a possibility. I'm not willing to testify to that. Again, I'm going to stick to my written testimony and defer on the legal side to the lawyers who have preceded me and will come after me.
Okay, but all right, well, you support this bill, right?
We support 7042, yes.
Okay, so I'm trying to find out with regard to the manufacturers, which are in this bill, what is it that you would want them to do that you don't think they're already doing?
Representative Trubisky, you've asked her the question 3 times. She's told you she doesn't have an answer. Move on to your next question.
You understand that, is it your understanding that manufacturers sell firearms to distributors who are licensed?
I'm sorry. I mean, a manufacturer of a gun
Yes,
manufactures the firearm.
right.
I don't know the intricacies of the path, but I do know that they come from a manufacturer to either a distributor, and I'm not sure, maybe directly to other dealers, but yes.
Okay, so if that distributor is licensed to distribute firearms by the government, is there some additional vetting that you think the manufacturer should do of that distributor more than the government has already done?
I really can't answer that question. I think, like I said in my testimony, we expect, you know, this bill would create a standard of care that would need to be followed. And then if harm happens down the line, there would be a cause of action, again, fact-based. We had a lawyer testify previously about certain hypotheticals and scenarios that could be imagined. But if everybody is following the law and being responsible, then this doesn't impact them.
So once a distributor has the firearms in its possession, it under current law, it's allowed to sell them to a licensed dealer, right? Is that your understanding?
Yes,
Okay, and that dealer is licensed by the government,
correct.
and the government has presumably done some vetting of that licensee before giving them a license, correct?
Correct.
Okay, is there something more than the government has already done that you would think should be in the standard of care for a distributor before selling firearms to the licensee?
I think that there are situations where not every gun industry member is acting responsibly. We've already discussed this morning that it is certainly not the vast majority. In fact, it's a minority of the industry members. This legislation is designed to offer a pathway to justice in the hopefully rare situation that someone is not following the rules. So I'll
Okay.
leave it at that.
And those rules are that they could only sell to licensed dealers?
Well, it would be reasonable controls at their point in the process. So, again, if in the wording of the statute, it will cover what the expectations are for each person in the chain.
Okay, and who determines what those reasonable controls are?
Again, I'm going to defer to the lawyers, but I know that reasonable controls in general are is sort of a typical standard of care for a civil liability bill such as this. But again, if I'm just going to look now, I mean, some of the things are enumerated in the statute. There's certain things like they shouldn't be selling to someone if there's a reasonable cause to believe that they're at risk of harming themselves or others, and other things like that. But beyond that, I defer to the lawyers who helped craft the language here.
Okay, but that one would be directed at a retailer. I'm talking about the distributor. The distributor doesn't distribute to an individual.
I mean, again, I could.
Representative Trubisky, again, I understand you were not here for the first 3 hours of this hearing. A lot of this was already covered, so I'm not going to allow us to retread over areas that were covered this morning. You're welcome to go review the tape. But more to the point, she has told you 3 times she does not have an answer to your question. Maybe somebody else this morning did, or somebody that'll come later, but to sit here and continue to ask the same question, frankly, is not fair to this witness nor to the other members of this committee.
Well,
Do you have a question that has not been covered yet? If not, ma'am, thank you very much for being with us today. We'll move on to the next person on our list.
Thanks so much.
Jordan Levine will be next.
Mr. Chairman,
Jordan Levine is next.
my questions were not covered by this witness, and I was trying to delve into the support of this legislation by this witness.
Jordan Levine is next to
And that's
testify.
perfectly legitimate.
And I am well within my right as chair to tell you that's enough questions to this witness, and we're moving on to the next person. So Jordan Levine will be next.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jordan Levine, and I'm the founder of A Better Way 2A. We're an organization dedicated to promoting responsible gun ownership and inclusivity within the firearms community. And I'm here to express my unequivocal opposition to House Bill 7042, a bill that's not only unconstitutional, but also completely irrational in its attempt to scapegoat an entire industry for the actions of criminals. I was going to read my written testimony, but after listening to some of the testimonies here, I've just been taking notes and would love to address a few things because it's incredibly frustrating that we keep ending up in this position where well-intentioned people end up wasting time proposing bills like this when we could spend the time developing strategies to actually address the root causes of violence that we're trying to prevent. We have people testifying about safe marketing practices who don't even know how guns go from a manufacturer to a store to a private owner. And I don't understand what people in these groups are trying to learn or doing if they're not trying to learn more about how these things work in order to propose better bills. A couple people before me were talking about marketing to minorities. What does marketing to minorities look like? The fastest growing group of new legal gun owners in this country is Black women. And it's not from marketing. Trans women are buying guns in record numbers. It's not from marketing. It's from the crazy world that we live in where people are trying to erase people's human rights from legal protections. And, these are things that we should be working together on in order to figure out policies that best address the root causes of the problems. But instead, we have people talking back and forth at each other and way past each other without actually listening, to what the person is saying. Everyone's too concerned with being right and not with learning about how to best address these problems. Marketing is not the reason for gun violence or school shooting. And it's a misguided distraction that distracts people from the social, economic, and psychological factors that actually contribute. I mean, we've got the war on drugs is the single greatest contributor to gun crime. Yet, I don't remember the last time I heard somebody talking about legalizing drugs and creating support systems for people who are addicted, because it's such a partisan talking point that we never hear. The conversation ends at party lines, and these are things that will have real marketable change on gun crime, on crime in general. But we're so distracted about trying to hurt somebody that we've never met before by placing these restrictions on them that are going to financially cripple them, or that are going to perceive to take away their rights. And it's just, I feel like we're having the same conversation every year. We come back here and nothing actually changes. The left gets farther left and the right gets farther right. And meanwhile, it's the average person who has to suffer in the middle.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee? If not, thanks for joining us. Peter Estrada? Is Peter Estrada still with us? Okay, how about Matthew Strasser?
I have to change this testimony to afternoon now, so bear with me if my tenses are correct.
Trying to keep it moving as best we can.
You got it, sir. Good afternoon, distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee. I'm here today to express my strong opposition to House Bill 7042. Through reading this bill, it is readily apparent that what the goal of this proposed legislation is. This legislature has done almost everything they can to slow the sales of firearms in the state of Connecticut, with assault weapons bans, magazine capacity restrictions, dictating on how you can carry your firearm, out of sight, out of mind, pushing gun owners and our gun culture to the edges of society. We live in a time where just the sight of a firearm can land a person in jail. The state's position on the legal gun owner is not lost on me. I know where we stand. The gentleman from Giffords mentioned that this bill will provide the avenue to sue out-of-state firearm industry members for misconduct in the state of Connecticut. Attorney General Tong has been placing orders for home-built firearm kits all over the country, and he hasn't had any issues suing those manufacturers or retail outlets if their product shows up in Connecticut. I would also like to address the earlier question on obtaining insurance after a violation of this statute. If time allows, I will bring up an incident involving stolen firearms further in my testimony, where the gun store owner shopped for insurance for nearly a month after his store was burglarized. He was closed during that month looking for insurance, along with an increase in his premium, and that's in a scenario when he was not liable because he was in compliance with all local, state, and federal requirements as an FFL. House Bill 7042 continues to punish those who are operating within the law for the actions of someone who is not under the control of a firearm industry members. It is telling when there is proposed legislation written to financially cripple a firearm manufacturer or a retail store, but we don't see comparable legislation geared towards going after the criminal who committed the illegal act. In 2022, 29 of the 26 families victimized in that terrible December morning in Sandy Hook announced a landmark victory against Remington Arms, the manufacturer of the rifle used in the massacre. They were awarded $73 million, the maximum allowed by Remington's 4 insurance policies. The press release from Koskoff, who I believe is testifying today, says this is an obvious celebration and a claim to victory. Is there any new legislation since 2022 during that victory that would prevent a future victim of gun crime from submitting and winning the same lawsuit? I believe this law is written to put the rest of the state's gun stores and manufacturers out of business. It is intentionally broad in scope, using open language like reasonably foreseeable. I've spoken with a handful of Connecticut FFLs. A single civil lawsuit settlement could close their doors, of either failing to navigate our complicated gun laws or shipping their product directly to Attorney General Tong's office. Particularly troubling are lines 80 through 83, where the legislation establishes.
Thank you, sir.
You got it.
Questions from the committee? Representative Trubisky?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in. So I assume you've read 7042?
Correct. in its
Okay.
entirety.
Having read the bill, are you able to discern what a manufacturer is supposed to do in order to prevent the harms that are outlined in this bill?
It's not immediately clear, no.
Are you able to discern what a distributor is supposed to do under this bill in order to prevent those harms?
No.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Further questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, thanks for being with us.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Afternoon now, I guess. Now you got me going. All right, Brian Donahue?
Yes, thank you, legislators on the Legislative Committee. My name is Brian Donahue. I founded a group called Not Just Us. We are over 875 different members, organization groups, communities across the state of Connecticut. We all come together to see how we can reduce violence and crime for children and students and for their families. And we fully agree with 7042. We feel that what I've been listening to today had talked a lot about people who are showing up and who are doing what they're supposed to do. But there are a lot of people who, from my understanding, that are not doing what they need to do. It is a minority, but we need to protect all of our children and all of our students and families. So we're not looking to say all the people who are following the laws, they wouldn't really be impacted by this legislation because of the fact that they're doing what they need to do. We're looking at for people who are not doing what they're supposed to do. You may be licensed, but doesn't mean that later after you're licensed, you're not going to be following, that you're going to be following the laws. So we have to look at the people who are and hold them accountable, people, manufacturers and gun sellers who are not taking their community into safety and who are doing things that they're not. Just because someone's licensed does not mean that they're going to be following the law every single time. And I thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions from the committee, Representative Trubisky?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in or testifying, even though you're not here. You're testifying about 7042?
Correct.
Okay. Have you read that bill?
I have.
Okay. Under that bill, what is a manufacturer supposed to do to prevent the harms that are foreseen in this bill?
I would have to refer back to it. Right now, I'm not in a position to, testify outside of my testimony because I'm not in front of my desk. I am out in the community right now. But what I would say is, as long as the manufacturers and drugs, the gun sellers are doing what they're supposed to do, then they're not going to be impacted. It's the ones who are not doing what they're supposed to do. We have to hold them accountable, not for the people who are doing what they need to do again, but for people who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay, and when you say doing what they're supposed to be doing, you mean following the law?
Correct. Just because someone's license does not mean that they're following the law. If later on a child or a student gets hurt and injured because somebody did not follow the law, that person needs to be accountable. So this is not for, this law would be for bad actors, not for people who are doing what they're supposed to be doing under the law.
Okay, so if they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing, it's already against the law, right?
Well, yes, but as heard earlier in earlier testimonies, it's not necessarily prosecuted the way it should be. So what we need to do is have backup legislation that will help the communities not lose family members and loved ones.
Okay, so your understanding of this bill is that this only affects people who are already breaking the law?
Correct. That who may have done something with the gun or any of the ammunition, altered it in a way, gave people advice that they shouldn't be giving. So it would be people who, the people who are following the law, there's no need for them. But the people who are not following the law need to be prosecuted.
Okay, so a manufacturer, for example, who follows the law and only sells firearms to a distributor who is licensed by the government, that person has not broken the law, right?
My understanding would be that that person would not have broken the law. It would be the people who, who after they got licensed or manufactured and they did not follow what they're supposed to be, what's already stated in law, that they would be the ones who would be prosecuted. And that's what we really have to do, is we have to make sure that our community members are safe.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Further
you.
questions or comments? If not, thanks for being with us, sir.
Thank you very much.
Melissa.
Take
King.
care.
Good afternoon, distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Melissa Kane, and I'm the Board Chair of Connecticut Against Gun Violence. I'm testifying today in support of HB 7042, an act concerning implementation of the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act. Much of CAGV's legislative focus and success over the past 30 years, which has been supported both by legislators who share our belief that common sense regulation of firearms saves lives, and by facts which demonstrate that those regulations daily protect us from gun crime, firearm suicide, and unintentional shootings, much of it has been grounded in limiting access to firearms from those who shouldn't possess them, and in preventing firearm violence through deterrence. No one piece of public policy or ban will solve the crisis of gun violence that takes the lives of some 200 Connecticut residents each year. It's a multifaceted approach, and a key missing piece to reducing that violence is firearm industry accountability. You've heard numerous times today, and it's been carefully documented, that a very small number of gun dealers supply the vast majority of guns used in crimes. However, because the firearms industry operates under unique immunity, it is extraordinarily difficult to hold them accountable for irresponsible business practice. A state statute which codifies required gun industry responsibility through reasonable controls is designed to operate within the established exceptions of PLACA. The L in PLACA is for lawful, and it leaves the states the power to decide what is lawful and unlawful. This bill will incentivize the industry to consider the risk to the public in their conduct and help ensure that firearms don't end up in the hands of straw purchasers, gun traffickers, and others who are prohibited from possessing firearms. Throughout U.S. history, our legal system has allowed the public to hold companies accountable when their irresponsible misconduct leads to harm. Accountability drives change and saves lives. The firearm industry should not be an exception. But to be clear, this bill does not punish law-abiding members of the gun industry. Responsible members of the firearm industry, people who sell accessories, holsters, people who sell guns responsibly, are not exposed to liability under this bill. In addition, the legislation in no way restricts the sale of firearms to legal purchasers and in no way affects lawful firearm owners. It is at its heart about deterrence, prevention, and consumer protection. It's about ensuring that bad actors in the firearm industry who act irresponsibly or prioritize profit over public safety adopt safer practices or face consequences, and it provides a clear path for legal resource. It is a common sense measure to help keep our communities safe from gun violence. I urge you to vote HB 7042 out of committee, and I urge you to work to pass this critical piece of legislation into law, joining the 9 other states that have enacted similar laws, all of which have similar gun purchasing processes and all of which have been repeatedly upheld in court. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Representative Fishman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
I was listening very intently. You talked about a liability for a holster seller. You're saying,
No liability. I'm saying
yeah, you said that there was be no liability.
I am saying what has already been testified to today, that the concern that if you are you're selling holsters, it would seem almost certainly unlikely that this would in any way affect you. Unless, I believe Attorney Pacino came up with a sort of rare, funny, he tried to come up with a situation in which someone was selling a holster that had been outfitted for an illegal gun, that perhaps could be the only time anything like that would affect someone who was selling that.
Sure. So, that was a scenario where a holster was created for the purpose of carrying a firearm as well as what are known as a sear, an implement. It's a little piece of metal that goes into a semi-automatic to make it a fully automatic, which are generally legal in Connecticut.
Right.
But certainly under this language, right, a firearm accessory could be a holster.
I believe that's the case, and I
Okay.
believe that anybody who was responsibly selling those is not in any harm or danger from this legislation.
Okay. So a mass shooting happens and the firearm was transported to the mass shooting in a holster. You're saying that there can be no liability under this law for that seller of the firearm accessory?
I am not an attorney, so I will definitely, I know Attorney Koskoff is going to be speaking soon. I would allow him to answer that, but as a layperson, I don't think that the holster has anything to do with it, but I'm not an attorney.
No, I understand. I mean, just so that you know, I used to be a very anti-gun person. So I know those various ways that people try and get guns out of the populace.
Sure.
And I appreciate you, but when you make a legal representation to this committee that there would be no liability for the holster seller,
Well,
that is a legal statement, right?
Sure.
So, under this language, when you look at reasonable controls, it talks about that the seller must employ reasonable controls to prevent the sale or distribution of a firearm industry product to a person prohibited from possessing a firearm under state. So, I guess because holsters are sold, slings for long guns are sold in various ways, right? And those implements
Again,
could be used in one of these tragedies. And I'm just
Sure. I'm not an attorney, and I would defer to the attorney who is coming after me, and I would have you look back at the testimony of Attorney Pacino, who dealt specifically with this instance, with this question, Raj.
no, I appreciate that. And this is an open testifying process. A lot of times I've learned some stuff sitting here, right? And I appreciate that. One of the areas of liability in here, it says that, one could allege in a civil lawsuit that the firearm industry member could have established, implemented, and enforced reasonable controls to prevent or lower the risk of harm alleged occurring, but failed to do so. So I guess, you could say, we had some people testify this morning, and all they do is sell us holsters, right? So I guess one could implement a procedure, a policy that they only sell to people, holsters, to people who have pistol permits, right? It's probably unreasonable. But what this says is that they could have established, implemented, and enforced reasonable controls to prevent or lower. And that's what I'm trying to put together. So
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking. You're asking about the excuse me, the specificity of the language in the bill referring to specifically holsters?
Well, yeah, because I'm taking your representation
Well,
about no
sure.
liability for a holster seller, and I'm putting myself in that position, looking at this language.
People who, my testimony was that people who responsibly sell holsters will not be exposed to liability under this bill. Again, I would refer you to Attorney Pacino's example of some fantasy of how I guess a holster could be seen as being irresponsible. But other than that, I'm not sure how to answer your question. I apologize.
No, I
And,
appreciate it.
so,
Yeah, no, did you
no, I was going to say, I think, the language of the bill, you are the legislators, you're working on very specifically on the language of the bill. And it's up to you to choose the exact words that make the most sense.
I appreciate it. I'm looking at the public policy because,
Right.
certainly one of the scenarios we talked about this morning was the lawful sale in Georgia.
Oh.
And, that seller not knowing that firearm was perhaps going to end up in some street transaction in Connecticut, and that this law would give liability on the Georgia seller is an extension. So, but I appreciate you coming here today. So thank you very much. And thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Further questions or comments? Okay, Rep. Trubisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in.
Pleasure.
Now, you're the chairman of the board of Connecticut Against Gun Violence?
I am, yes.
Okay. Are you speaking on behalf of your organization?
I'm speaking on my own behalf, and I believe that what I'm speaking to, the organization is very much in favor of HB 70542. Yes.
Is carrying a firearm in public a risk to public safety?
I'm not sure how that directly relates to this specific bill. I think people have different views on that.
Okay. And what is your organization's view on that?
Well, I think as long as, I'll go back to Connecticut Against Gun Violence, not Connecticut Against Guns. So we would like to make sure that people are safe, and there can be many different reasons that people carry guns. So I wouldn't off the bat just say carrying a gun is always unsafe. I don't really have a blanket answer for that.
Okay. So it's not clear?
It's not that it's not clear. I don't think it's germane to this specific legislation, and I think that it's nuanced.
I'm sorry, you think that it's what? I didn't.
Nuanced? I think it's nuanced, yeah.
Okay. Nuanced and not clear are the same? No?
Sure.
Okay. Is shooting in your backyard a risk to public safety?
Well, I guess it would depend on many different factors.
Could
Like,
be.
it could be, certainly could be, certainly may not be.
Who decides?
Well, I don't believe that there is a current state law. I believe municipalities at this point. I don't know off the top of my head. I believe different municipalities have different, regulations on the books regarding that. Some do, some don't.
Okay. Is carrying 2 guns a risk to public safety?
Representative Trubisky, are we on the bill?
Yes, this is about the bill.
Which line?
Line 57.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm sorry, could you restate the question?
Is
Having to-
somebody-
This is having to do with line 57 of the bill?
Is somebody carrying 2 guns a risk to public safety?
Again, I don't think I can answer that as a blanket yes or no. It depends on who the person is and what the reason is.
Okay, if they have a
Law enforcement.
well, how about a Connecticut pistol permit holder?
I don't think I can answer that question. I would assume, as this bill does, that most people are very responsible gun owners. So if you have a responsible gun owner and they are a legal gun owner, then no, it would not pose a risk.
All right, thank you.
Further questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Sarah Kettle.
Good afternoon to the members of the Joint Judiciary Committee. My name is Sarah Kettle, and on behalf of the National Rifle Association, I would like to communicate our strong opposition to House Bill 7042, 7037, 7137, and our support for House Bill 7070 and 7194. House Bill 7042 is part of a national anti-gun effort to undermine the Federal Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, FLACA. It has the potential to bankrupt local firearm industry members through a litany of lawsuits that inflate business costs to a point where opportunities for law-abiding citizens to purchase firearms, ammunition, and firearm components for lawful purposes are severely limited. FLACA does not provide blanket immunity to firearms industry, as the predicate exception allows industry members to be held liable for harms that result from their own misbehavior. One of the main purposes of FLACA was to ensure that legislatures, not the courts, were the ones establishing the rules the industry members would have to follow. The predicate exceptions Congress had in mind were laws passed specifically for the gun industry that set forth clear, objective, and readily ascertainable standards of conduct. House Bill 7042, in contrast, is intentionally vague and invites judges to do exactly what Congress meant to prohibit: establish on a case-by-case basis additional best practices or other safeguards above and beyond what is clearly spelled out in statute. House Bill 7042 states that a firearm industry member shall establish, implement, and enforce reasonable controls. But what is reasonable? This bill uses very loose standard of reasonable foreseeability, and the only thing limiting an industry member's liability under House Bill 7042 is the imagination of gun control activists, trial lawyers, and activist judges about what additional steps could have, in retrospect, prevented a bad outcome. House Bill 7137 would include juvenile records and misdemeanors from other jurisdictions in firearms background checks, and this presents a number of complicated issues, including those related to due process. The juvenile justice system is typically more informal and less focused on procedural due process than the adult criminal justice system, and the same can be said for many misdemeanor convictions as well. Moving on to Section 4 of House Bill 7137, which deals with merchant category codes for firearms retailers. MCCs enable payment processors and banks to monitor and collect data on certain types of transactions. Collection of firearm retailer financial transaction data amounts to surveillance and registration of law-abiding gun owners. It should be assumed that the goal of this program is to share all collected firearm retailer MCC data with government authorities and potentially private third parties that may include gun control organizations and anti-gun researchers. This in turn has the potential to create a chilling effect on the exercise of a constitutionally protected right. Further, this scheme offers a means by which to restrict and survey those who exercise their First Amendment rights in a manner gun control advocates or the federal government disapproves. Lastly, implementation of this type of legislation has the potential to create federal preemption and interstate commerce issues. For example, 19 states have all passed legislation prohibiting the collection of this type of information. This could create serious dilemmas for card payment processors when dealing with interstate transactions or those operating in multiple states. House Bill 7070 is important legislation that removes the existing duty to retreat for a person in a house of religious worship. Victims should have the protection of the law, not criminals. Law-abiding citizens should not fear criminal prosecution.
Thank you. I know it's a lot to squeeze in, but like I said at the beginning, we do have, if you've submitted written testimony, we've got it all already.
I understand.
Questions from the committee, Representative Fishman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming here. I wanted to ask you about one of these bills, 7137. And you talked about, and it's section 1, the due process issue. And I agree with you. However, you know, policy-wise, I don't think that somebody who we have reason to believe may perpetrate a crime of violence involving a firearm against another human being should be able to acquire a firearm. Do you agree?
I do agree, yes.
Okay. So perhaps if we were to change this language and say if somebody in another state is convicted of, let's say within the last 7 years, because we have clean slate in Connecticut, which is automatically erasing many misdemeanors and felonies. So let's say 7 years. They've been convicted in another state of use of force against another person within the last 7 years. would you be supportive of that?
So you're saying in another state, if they've been convicted of a misdemeanor? Sure. You're saying in another state, they've been convicted of a misdemeanor for use of force against another individual?
Sure, because if it was a felony in another state, they're
The
automatically
felony, it would be
barred,
prohibited already.
right?
Mhm.
So, that's generally my concern
Mhm.
is dovetailing other states' laws into Connecticut. 'Cause we're saying by public policy that somebody who has committed certain misdemeanor crimes should be ineligible to get a firearm.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to think, how are we going to mesh this with 50 other states and 169 different municipalities?
Mhm.
But if, somebody got convicted of, let's say, assault and it's a misdemeanor in Utah within the last 7 years,
Mhm.
I think it would be inappropriate for them to be eligible here in Connecticut
Mhm.
if it's a Utah conviction, but ineligible if it's a Connecticut conviction.
Mhm.
So what is your position and what's your organization's position on that?
We would be opposed to any misdemeanor being used as a disqualifying factor, seeing as a lot of times people will, with misdemeanors, typically just take a plea bargain in order to lessen their sentence or they don't necessarily have the means and aren't willing to fight it as well as a felony conviction. So we are opposed to misdemeanors being used as a disqualifying factor all around.
Any misdemeanor?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your
Mhm.
testimony.
Representative Trubisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you were trying to get a lot in a very short period of time and had to go through it very quickly. Now, did you submit written testimony?
We did not at this time.
Okay, do you intend to?
Yes, if the window to do so is still open, we will.
Okay, because I'm seeing a lot of pieces of testimony on a lot of these bills and I don't see any of yours.
Mhm.
So I, certainly would appreciate it because, frankly, I wasn't able to catch all the words coming
It
out
was
of
a
your
lot.
mouth.
Yes.
So if you could maybe write them down, that would be great.
Happy to do so.
Thank you. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Mhm.
So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you, Representative. So let me just make sure I understand. So our current law in Connecticut, for example, that says if you're convicted of stalking in the second degree, and that should be an automatic disqualifier. You're opposed to that? Your organization's opposed to that law that we currently have on the books?
Our organization is opposed to all misdemeanors that would be used as disqualifying factors.
Let me ask you just quickly on 7042. You mentioned there's 9 other states that have similar legislation,
Yes.
correct? Okay. In those
I'm
9
sorry.
states, has there,
I didn't mention that with 7042, actually. I mentioned that with 7137 with the MCC. There are 19 other states that prohibit it.
okay, so how about, I thought you said something about on 7042
I
that
did.
this is part of I think the term was sort of a wave of similar legislation around the country
Mhm.
that was being brought. What was that?
There has been an effort to introduce similar legislation in other states to go after the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Firearms Act to undermine it, similar to this.
Okay. And to your knowledge, has legislation been passed in other states that is similar to, in
I believe
effect,
it
to
has. Yes.
let me just finish my question.
Oh, I'm
Sorry, before
sorry.
you answer. So has there been legislation that's passed, been enacted into law in other states that is similar to 7042?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. In any of those states that have enacted similar legislation, are you aware of any lawsuit that's been brought that has, I think the term used, bankrupted a gun manufacturer or gun dealer?
I believe right here in Connecticut, Remington was actually bankrupt by a lawsuit where the case itself was not actually determined on the merits of the law because Remington went bankrupt and the plaintiffs had to settle with Remington's insurers.
Okay, was that brought under a statute similar to 7042?
I would have to look at the specifics of that lawsuit.
Okay, yeah, my question was sort of just specific to these other states that have enacted similar legislation, and whether there's been a lawsuit brought in any of those states that has bankrupted any business under that law.
Off the top of my head, I'm not aware, but I think the Remington example shows that it's entirely possible that these lawsuits just tie industry members up in costly litigation that has the potential to bankrupt them and cause them to move into other states and go out of business.
Okay, all right, thank you. Representative Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just backing up to the misdemeanor stance for a second. There are plenty of circumstances where someone's charged with a felony and the plea bargain is to get them to a misdemeanor. So I guess I'm a little confused on why, all misdemeanors are an issue for your organization.
We feel that the level of due process is just not as high as it is with felony convictions, and we don't think it should be a disqualifier.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, Representative Howard.
Thank you, ma'am. Do you represent your organization throughout the country or just more locally?
More locally, I have a couple other states, but
Do you know there's been many references to these 9 other states have enacted legislation similar to 7042. Do you know of any direct impact that's had on the retailers in those states? Are you aware of any of that? As far as, it's been talked about insurance costs, et cetera. Can you talk about how enacted legislation in those 9 other states, if you know, has affected them?
off the top of my head, I'm not aware, but I know it has the potential, has been seen with getting caught up in these costly litigation, how that can really ruin the business.
Okay, so nothing specifically from those 9. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Seeing no further questions, thanks for being with us. Josh Koskoff will be next.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. I've never testified, believe it or not, in hearings, but I know I have limited time, but I think I want to correct the record of the last testifier. Remington did not go bankrupt as a result of our Sandy Hook lawsuit. Remington was a 150-year-old company, roughly, with roots right here in Connecticut, that was swallowed up by a private equity firm. And due to the gross mismanagement of that firm and the squeezing out of the old guard at Remington and the search for profits in the back of the AR-15 markets, specifically peddling at AR-15s to kids, they bankrupted this 150-year-old company in a matter of years. So it is just simply wrong. And I'm not suggesting in any way, I mean, the only reason I know it is because I handled the case. So I'm not suggesting that that was intentional. I'm a private practice attorney from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Very proud to be from the state, as you all are. And our firm has been in Connecticut for over 80 years, and we represent families in all kinds of civil matters. And typically the matters involve some sudden or catastrophic thing that happens that upends one of our friends or neighbors here in Connecticut, and usually involving like death or serious injury. And in those moments, oftentimes you have profound sadness and shock. But what makes what's a common thing that happens for at least the people who consult with us are these scenarios are typically under circumstances that involve either a corporate or institutional or individual recklessness, or, if you will, wrongfulness or irresponsibility, something we call negligence generally. Oftentimes, the culprit when it comes to corporate misconduct is not surprisingly greed. And I had never handled a gun case. There aren't that many. You're being presented with a sky is falling picture about something that just is not true, which is, there are not a lot of lawsuits. There wouldn't be a lot of lawsuits with this bill either. There've never been a lot of lawsuits against the gun industry because it's just a very hard industry to sue, even before PLACA. But that's what brought me to Sandy Hook Families and learning about this industry and some of the practices and wrongs and the marketing schemes that they were up to. It's heartbreaking as a lawyer to be involved in any case. I've been involved in cases with parents who lost teenagers to drunk driving, who lost children to drownings, cancer, and other medical conditions. but I can tell you that there is nothing I have ever experienced, and I don't think that could be experienced quite like sitting down, at least from the outside perspective, sitting down with families, stunned, shocked, in grief that you can't imagine, having had their children taken from them in a shooting in an elementary school, in a first grade classroom. I know that you all are heavily involved.
That's the
That's it?
connection here. But
Man, I
that's,
was just getting wound up. I haven't even talked about holsters.
that I know. All right. Well, let's see. My guess is there'll be some questions for you.
Okay.
Questions.
Holster away.
Questions from the committee. Everybody's going to holster all their questions, I guess.
Okay.
Josh, let me ask real quick, because one of the questions that keeps coming up is there sort of similar instances where we hold sort of one industry or one group of folks potentially civilly liable for certain conduct or either an act or omission? And you know, you mentioned drunk driving, which is the one I keep coming back to.
Sure.
We do have a dram shop liability act on the books, and a bar that serves too much alcohol to somebody and they go out and they drive and they kill somebody, there's potential liability there. Are there other instances like this legislation in our tort system in Connecticut that you can point to as sort of analogous to what's proposed here?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's every other instance, every other industry, every other individual, for that matter, every other company. My company, the company of the gun dealer, not with the exception of the gun industry and associated, retailers and wholesalers, are operating under the same set of rules, which are the rules of reasonableness in their conduct. So what that does, obviously, is it doesn't list out, here's what you have to do to be reasonable in every circumstance. What it says is, hey, when you're thinking about doing something, think about the effects of it. As a business owner, although a different type of business, we don't get into it that much, but most businesses and industries hate to be responsible for anything because it gets in their way of making money, and they don't want to think about this. But the difference between the gun industry and all other industries is all other industries have to think about it, because they know that if they don't think about it, they don't take reasonable steps with whatever it is to lower the risk of the public or consumers or your constituents getting hurt, they're going to have to face a devastated family, God forbid, who are going to be looking for answers and learning about the decisions they made and asking the question of, were they reasonable? That's all it is. So I guess to answer your question, yes, there are, in every other industry and retailer imaginable, they face that basic bond of responsibility that we all have towards each other. That's called, that's the reasonable man, or in this case, a reasonable industry, a reasonable corporation.
Great. Thank you very much. Further questions? Representative Fishbein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, I just, the mirror that you gave us is the Dram Shop Act. Well, the one that you were discussing. You agree with Representative Staffstrom, the chairman, that is a similar control, that we can examine that in line with the legislations before us?
I'm sorry, Representative Fishbein. Maybe because it's lunchtime, I'm not following. Can you just restate that, or?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sure. The underlying predicate being that, well, we already regulate industries in this. You agree with that statement?
Industries, yes. I mean, the courts don't have the only role in holding industry feet to the fire, so to speak, or responsible. Obviously, as elected officials, you carry the people's voice to industry on our behalf as well.
Yeah. So the question was, do we, in other areas of industry, regulate in such a fashion as 7042 would have?
It seems like your question, we might agree on this, that if the Dram Shop Act is an additional, I'm trying to think about the Dram Shop Act, as I understand it, I don't do a lot of the work, but is a balance between when you can hold a bar or alcohol service provider liable, and it provides some limitations. So there is some kind of a balancing among different interests in that particular example. I don't know if I even answered your question. I hope I'm trying to.
No, I appreciate that. I guess in the dram shop situation, you have the purveyor of alcohol. The allegation is that they knew or should have known that the individual who was ingesting was already inebriated.
Right. I think sorry to interrupt. I interrupted you. But
And then an accident results, and that's where dram shop gets risked to the table.
Right. It draws a line between, I think, obvious intoxication, maybe. I'm not sure I'm nailing the statutory language. Again, it's not something I do. We've handled cases, but not me personally. But yes, there is some line drawing about what defines, when a dram shop is liable and when it isn't, effectively.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the industry that we can examine, because, in that example, we don't hold the glass company, the manufacturer of the glass that the person drank out of and then had the accident. We don't hold them liable under dram shop. We don't hold the stool manufacturer that the person sat on when they were drinking the alcohol. We don't have liability there.
Well, I actually did have a case where the stool just broke on somebody. We didn't take the case, but yes, I take the point. And I would even say you don't hold a car manufacturer liable simply because the car was involved in a collision that did serious harm or killed somebody, right?
Yeah.
So we don't hold industries liable. That wouldn't be fair either, right? We have to have industries. We have to be able to buy cars. People have to be able to get guns, if they choose to do so. And so that's not the question. The question is not whether a manufacturer makes and sells something. It's what conduct have they engaged in that is not responsible, or that increases the risk of something happening that could injure or kill somebody, in this instance right here in Connecticut. And so I think that there may be a misconception. And again, I know you guys have a lot of things to consider, but the Sandy Hook case was not premised on the fact that Remington made an AR-15. I'm not getting into that debate about AR-15s. It's premised. It was premised on the fact that they were actively promoting the AR-15s to kill. They were actively promoting minors and adolescents and trying to reach them. Scary thing as a parent when your kids are growing up, that you have actors like Remington going right around you and trying to sell an AR-15 to an adolescent and encourage them to have a relationship with a weapon because of the power it connotes, and to take out revenge on your aggressors, like in all these school shootings. That's what's happening. So that's what's wrong. To your example, if you had a glass company that promoted taking a glass and slamming against somebody's head, or taking glass and saying, go out and sick of bullying, take this glass, crush it. It hurt, glass can cut, something like that. I'm just making it up. Of course you wouldn't. Then none of you, we wouldn't have, we would agree. Of course, that manufacturer marketer should be liable. So it really is, I think that, both sides of these issues get pretty much in their corner, and I can see it here, although I have to say, I'm very appreciative of the civility, because things are a little different in Washington. But it does get, people are not able to see really the specifics. I think that's a very good term here. And so, I think that this bill, what it does is it says, hey, you may not want, like all into other industries, gun industry, you may not want to think about it. You may want to have to think about the impact of your business and marketing and the potential to increase risk or decrease it. But you know what? You're going to have to if you want to do business in our state. And if you're a responsible gun company, or responsible retailers, I mean, the retailers that came up who've testified here, I mean, I want to meet these people. They remind me of my family firm, the guy with the gun store. I mean, that guy's a responsible guy. That's not the person you worry about. And he has nothing to worry about. You know, if you act responsibly.
But presently under our law, the Remington case happened, right?
Correct.
So Connecticut was recognized as that lawsuit was appropriate, and that's the sort of activity that you were addressing, right?
Right.
Marketing, right? So that's already dealt with in our law, right?
Yes, I would say that you know, on a case that would be similar to that, and God forbid there ever is one, then yes, that law is the law of the state of Connecticut on that particular issue.
Sure, and that's under the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act. Was the
Right. I think what's good about this, if I don't mean to take up your time, but I think what's good about this, why I think that you all should at least be in favor of this part of it, is that it really just is it's eliminating any lack of clarity in what is that much crystal clear about what the expectations are, right? Some of the things that you guys are talking about getting sued for, you know, you want to know because you want, as the industry side, you want to do things to make it less likely that that's going to happen at all, let alone that you're going to be, that there's going to be an inquiry into it. So, you know, I don't really see this. I mean, I will say, I don't know a lot about it. The holster does not seem to me to be a high ticket item here. I don't, so.
I take it that you've reviewed the languages before.
I have, yes, sir.
Okay. So, in line 57, well, it's 50.
Hold on a second.
I'll
Okay.
read it to you.
Yeah, no, let me just grab it. Hang on, I have it. 57, okay. Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah, I'll put it together with 55 through 57 so that it makes sense to everyone.
Okay.
It says that no firearm industry member shall advertise, market, or promote firearm industry products in this state in a manner that promotes unlawful sales, unlawful use, or use that promotes risk to public safety.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just focusing on the last part.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, oh, great question. And, you know, there's such a different, there's the marketing, the way things are marketed now, the options to any industry are just so vast. So, and any number of ways to reach audiences that were off limits to some of these industries, like the gun industry. I don't know about you, we grew up in different parts of Connecticut and different cultures. And I didn't know what an AR-15 was when I was growing up. Most of my friends didn't, but AR-15s were readily available to anyone who made it. This is really like the nub of what I think the problem is, that what the industry has done is that they've taken advantage and harnessed the power of advances to completely reimagine the marketing and the way they market these, what everybody agrees to are very lethal weapons. Now, I might be talking about an AR-15, but all guns, of course, have the potential to harm. And what was once off limits because what were children and adolescents. And so any company, what this statute establishes, I think with a perfect amount of sort of balance of enough information, but not so defined that it is limiting, would be marketing a AR-15 to kids at all. Marketing firearms to kids directly through social media like Instagram. We have a case right now in Uvalde where the shooter was pumped with ads from Instagram promoting the Daniel Defense rifle that he used in the shooting to kill 19 children, some of whom were left with only sneakers, left with their body, like this young lady, Maite Rodriguez, because the rest of her body was eviscerated. Daniel Defense in that case used Instagram to promote an AR-15 for revenge, to commit crime, to take out revenge against your aggrievements to children. That's the message that appeals to children. When we were growing up, sir, again, I'll defer to you. If you knew one thing about guns and gun marketing when we were growing up, then that's one more thing that I knew. I've only learned this afterwards. But the marketing was very responsible. You want a hunting rifle to go hunting with your dad and your grandpa? What a great American tradition. And here it is. Here's your Remington rifle. You want a shotgun for home defense? Here it is, defending your home. The marketing that marketing has been obliterated. Why? Because it doesn't sell enough guns. And it keeps the market to responsible gun owners. So what the Remingtons of the world did, what Daniel Defense is doing, what many manufacturers are doing, not all, but many, is that they are promoting their firearms not to be used for home defense, not to be used for hunting, but to kill, to engage in lone gunman combat missions. You shouldn't have to tell the gun industry that that is wrong and that is likely to increase the risk of their misuse and criminal behavior. But here we are. And so that is a great question to ask. I would ask me that question. I'm happy to go on for even longer and provide examples to you, sir, because I think that, I don't know if you're a parent, but I'll say that when you see the types of marketing that is going on behind all of our backs to our kids to try to capitalize and monetize their adolescent, issues that we all had, you would be sickened. And nobody would support that. None of you would support that regardless of your ideology. So that is exactly, so the marketing, but how do you define that? You could say minors, you could say, but that's what this bill is pretty good, I think, because it says, promoting, the language you read, promoting, promotes unlawful sales. Yeah, you can't sell AR-15s to kids under 18.
Specifically about a use that promotes risk to public safety.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
so
portion.
Yeah. Well, I assume that that everybody agrees that a firearms manufacturer, any industry, any corporate, any for-profit industry should not promote illegal, dangerous, or unsafe use of their product. I think as a premise, I assume you'd agree with that.
And I believe our law prevents, right in our statutes, says if one believes that somebody is going to use a firearm for illegal activity, that transaction is not supposed to happen. But I'm trying.
Oh yeah, yes, you're talking about a straw sale. You're not, but that's not the point I'm making.
The clause once again that says that promotes risk to public safety. I mean, some people think that openly carrying a firearm is a risk to public safety, right? So, I mean, I don't necessarily agree, but some people out there think that that is a risk to public safety. And I'm just trying to, what is your understanding as to this particular clause? A use that promotes a risk to public safety?
Well, a use that promotes a risk to public safety is getting the email of a 17-year-old adolescent who's been bullied and trying to sell them an AR-15 to take out, marketed for the purposes of committing revenge. That is a risk to public safety. That's the facts of Uvalde. A risk to public safety is doing business. You asked the question, so I'll just answer it. The risk in the Sandy Hook shooting, which I know you must be, it must be a lot weigh on all of you, because of course that what could be a higher priority than preventing that. What we found out in that case was that what Remington did was it took its weapon, the Bushmaster brand, and it cut a deal with Activision, which makes Call of Duty, to put the weapon in the game and make it the most desirable weapon for kids, for adolescents that played it. And that weapon is portrayed in that game for one thing, to kill. And it was very desired because it was a killing machine in that virtual experience, just like it is in real life. And what Remington knew, we have the documents to prove it, is that the kids would find that weapon and they would type in ACR, it's called Adaptive Combat Rifle. And what would happen? They'd land on the Bushmaster page. The shooter at Sandy Hook heard that call. We know that because he was a shut-in. He only played Call of Duty, and he left a trail of evidence showing that that marketing to him worked. And the folks over at Remington were thrilled with this new technology that they could harness, so that because the parents are just in the way for the new modern gun industry. They don't want to deal with us because we're buzzkills for them. They want our kids, and they were reaching this kid. They were promoting crime, and he committed the very assault that Call of Duty trains and that the ACR that Remington placed, reached him with the message for. That's wrong. They were promoting crime. That increased the risk to public safety. And the gun industry has a lot of smart people. Like every industry has smart people. It has people who care. And so, if I know and I'm a gun industry and I'm at the board meeting at Remington with this statute, I'm going to say, hey, hold on a second. Do you really think we should be putting branding this weapon in this game that promotes killing?
Hold on a second. I'm gonna rein this back in because I appreciate the attempt to answer a question in full, but
it's 1 o'clock.
I feel like we're going a little.
Okay. As you can see, I can answer that question for hours probably, and I don't mean to suggest you don't.
That is not what we are hoping any of us do. Representative Fishbaum.
Thank you. And I appreciate the exchange, as far as marketing in the Sandy Hook situation, the fact of the matter is, no matter what anybody thinks, there was a lot of things that happened that were bad there. It was a safe storage issue.
Oh yeah.
That kid didn't go and purchase a firearm. So I don't know that marketing had anything to do with it. And at the end of the day, there were defenseless people in that school. So I really have a lot of trouble with that. I'm just looking at this language, which is what we're talking about here today. I'm just having a lot of problem because your perception of what promotes a risk to public safety, because certainly marketing to a 17-year-old, which it is impossible in this country for a 17-year-old to purchase an AR-15. Impossible. Well, legally, okay? Because we all know that illegal guns are sold.
Right. Straw sales and so forth.
Absolutely.
The type of thing that the bill is trying to prevent.
Okay, hold on.
That doesn't.
Hold on. Again, I will say what I said earlier. I recognize that sometimes when folks come here, they are trying to engage in the conversation, but this is a conversation that is staggered. So the question gets asked and completed, and then the response gets offered and completed. If that doesn't happen, it becomes a little bit difficult to follow the conversation. And in the room, maybe sometimes you can follow the conversation, sometimes not. But certainly when I'm listening on TV, it is not easy up when folks do that. So I get it. We are here until we're done. Hopefully not super late, but we're here until we're done. And one person at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm almost done, Josh. I just, you started to talk about video games, and your intent that this legislation, should it pass, would extend to video game manufacturers also?
No, because video game manufacturers are already under the common law duty to act reasonably. So they don't, the reason why as I understand, I mean, I think it's the reason why laws like this are relevant is because PLACA specifically wanted states to be able to create their own laws related to firearms and allow states to effectively police and protect their own people to the extent they felt, their constituents' interests were served.
I appreciate it. I've always been interested in the dynamic that, the gun industry was denigrated through that process, yet you admit that there was significant activity with video games that, to a certain extent, maybe brainwashed in that. And we see other
good argument. I mean, it's very
that industry. Right?
Yeah. I mean, we make some good points, but an industry's conduct is measured in the world we live in, not the one we wish we lived in. So it kind of works both ways, right? Like, so yes, that if there were no, if there were no guns, then video games, to the people who believe, promoting killing wouldn't be a big deal. If there were no video games, then gun industry would be deprived, I guess, in their way of promoting killing through the video game, and that would also be, lower the risk. And you can always find multiple things that contribute to an outcome like a mass shooting. And the question is, which are the ones that we can work on? What can't we work on? And, are they, in a given instance, was that likely to change, the result? That's,
Thank you for
summarizing. Yeah, thank you. Good questions.
Thank you, Representative Dubitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in. Very much appreciate it. Now, I see you are an attorney. Is that right?
Is it that obvious? Yes, I have.
Okay, and do you represent any of the gun violence prevention organizations?
No, no disrespect to the political side of this, but I very much, with this, I'm only really here because of my relationship with the Connecticut case of SOTA. I don't have any affiliations. I mean, I've gotten to know some of the folks in the different organizations because some of these organizations have litigation, but to directly answer your question, wait, I want to make sure I have this right. What was the specific question again?
I asked if you represented any of the gun violence prevention organizations.
No, sir, absolutely not.
Are you speaking on behalf of anybody other than yourself?
I mean, I'd like to think I'm speaking on behalf of 20 constituents. They would be constituents this year. The children at Sandy Hook would be of voting age this year. So I'd like to think I'm advancing and advocating for them and for, but no, not in the manner, I don't think not in the way your intent of your question is.
Okay. Representative Fishbein asked you about line 57 in the bill, and I'd like to
Sure.
touch base with you on that. Given that you're a lawyer, I'd like to, obviously I'm not asking you for legal advice, but I would, because I probably can't afford you, but I would like to get your impression of the language used in this bill.
Mm-hmm.
In line 57, that paragraph 55 to 57,
right,
prohibits firearms industry members from advertising in a manner that promotes unlawful sales.
Right.
Okay. Is it your understanding that it would prevent somebody from advertising in a manner that promotes sales that are unlawful in Connecticut?
Promote sales. I don't know. You would have to give me the sale that you're contemplating that was unlawful, I think, to help me, fairly answer it. I'll tell you what I understand the language to really cover, because there are unlawful, because I'm not an expert in the interstate, what's lawful in one state and what's lawful in the next in general, even in firearms. But what I would take that to cover is promoting sales to minors, for example. And you can promote a sale to a minor or engagement with a minor without actually, sort of by falling short of just saying, hey, come buy this or be interested in this firearm. It's in most states, it is unlawful to sell or offer to sell a firearm to a minor. So I think that, the way I would, but now understand, I'm really focused on the business side of the gun industry, but I think that what they try to do is be the first to brand or promote their weapons with children and adolescents. because it's a very competitive market. So that to me is unlawful sale, right? Promote, whether it happens or not is a different story. But certainly again, the devil's in the details, and I just want to be clear that, just because a shooting happens doesn't mean the gun industry's was engaged in wrongful conduct. It really matters what the details are. And so most cases I get called on, I have to tell the people, I'm sorry, I don't think there's a case here. I can't really do better than that.
So in the instance you just mentioned,
Yes, sir.
Selling to a minor. So let's persons between the ages of 18 and 20 are prohibited from possessing handguns.
Uh-huh.
But in other states, they can. So if I
see.
advertised a pistol, for example, and my advertising came into Connecticut and it said, this is a great handgun for 18 to 20-year-olds, would that be an unlawful sale?
The promotion is occurring to somebody out of state or in state?
Well, it's a national publication. My advertising is nationwide, and it happens to make its way into Connecticut.
I'm trying to imagine the promotion, because I can't think of promotions that, even in the old days of marketing in the gun industry, when it was very responsible in its marketing, that's not the way this product is promoted. So I guess I think of it as, if I will say this, if the promotion promotes crime, then and reaches a young audience, absolutely. But that hits on the other things as well, right? So that might capture all things. I think that I think it would depend on the circumstances. If you had a targeted demographic, let's say a gun company wants to sell, we don't care what the law is in Connecticut. We want to try. I don't know how this would really work. I'm not as creative as Mr. Fishbein with the hypotheticals, I guess, on this issue.
Let me give you a different hypothetical.
Yeah, thank you. Bail me out of this one.
Because I'm asking you because you're an attorney. And
to
anybody
surprise
can
you.
understand this language. An attorney probably could. So I'm a handgun manufacturer, and
Okay.
I'm advertising my handguns in nationwide publications, and they accept magazines that hold greater than 10 rounds. Now, in most states, that's perfectly legal. In Connecticut, it's a felony. So if I advertise my handgun that takes a 12-round magazine, if I advertise that in Connecticut, am I promoting an unlawful sale?
Well, I guess by the rigidity of the words, you could make that argument. Though I don't know a lawyer who got through first-year law school who would ever take a case like that. It's because you have to remember, sir, that you have to tie the conduct has to be of a certain wrongfulness. You have to tie that plausibly, to an outcome. And to your point earlier, or I think somebody mentioned, oftentimes there are multiple features. So I can't see how that would actually really result in any litigation. But the other thing I would just want to say is, and I know you can see that even a lawyer who is engaged in interpreting statutes under plain meaning, and sometimes having to go to legislative intent, the reason legislative intent itself is helps is because statutes, despite being written by really smart people like you all are, language that's the first part of it. Then you have the body of law that tries to interpret statutes. So,
But would you agree with me that arguably the language in this statute would cover that circumstance?
I think you could make the argument that if you promoted an unlawful sale and it hits a state, but I think this may have also been pointed out, if it's unlawful to get the magazine in Connecticut that is being promoted. But how would that ever, I don't see how that would ever translate into anything that was actionable in a given situation, right? Because I think it's been pointed out, I guess an 18 to 21-year-old can't get a magazine of that, or 20, can't get a magazine of that nature anyway. So while on the first prong of could it be argued that that meets this? Yes, I think so. I could argue it. I could also probably argue against it, but it wouldn't be, it's not something that will ever happen. And that doesn't mean it's not worth, I appreciate though, that's still.
I understand that perhaps you and other attorneys might decide not to take that case, but I think that you and I both agree that the language arguably covers that conduct. Let me move on to the next part, the unlawful use. So for example, bear hunting is illegal in Connecticut. So I'm a manufacturer of rifles that are particularly well suited for bear hunting, and I send out an advertisement nationwide that finds its way into Connecticut that advertises that I am promoting bear hunting with my bear hunting rifle, and bear hunting is illegal in Connecticut. Would that arguably fit within the term unlawful use?
I mean, I'm not aware. I mean, bears don't have standing in court to assert such claims. And so I don't think anybody on either side really thinks that this statute is talking in any which way, shape, or form about bears. No, I mean, it would never, I don't know. But all I know is that we know that what happened in Connecticut, it wasn't bears that got.
Okay, let me move on to the next section, which is a use that promotes risk to public safety.
Yeah.
Okay. Many people in Connecticut believe that a person carrying a firearm, openly or concealed, that does not have a pistol permit would be a risk to public safety. Would you agree with that?
I think it depends. I haven't really thought about that particular law a lot. I mean, my general view is that, but I just respond to evidence and facts, and I'm just aware that if somebody has a gun on them, they're more likely to get killed or injured than they are to protect themselves. But aside from that, I don't really have a point of view.
Okay, well, let's assume an argument can be made in Connecticut that I'm carrying about a permit is a risk to public safety. In most states in this nation, they have what is commonly known as constitutional carry, where a person can just purchase a firearm from their friend, stick it in their pocket, and be off to the races. There is no permitting process in many states, and those states that do have permitting processes, many of them, if not most of them, also have constitutional carry where you don't need any type of permit. So if I am a manufacturer of handguns and I advertise my handguns in a national publication, and I say, buy our handguns, they are particularly well suited for concealed carry, and by the way, we support constitutional carry.
Okay.
That is not only illegal in Connecticut, but many would say that promotes risk to public safety. Would I be in violation of this statute?
Well, the only cause retrospectively, I guess, would be, did that promotion increase the risk of something happening that happened? Like, I guess if I will tell you, I don't think so, but I would say that, you know, if your fact pattern, good start for let's accept everything that you said, and let me just add a couple of things. If the marketer, and typically the marketer and the manufacturer in today's gun industry are the same, because the scale and the money that the manufacturers have is just so enormous. And if that manufacturer marketed that concealed carry weapon and they marketed it to, let's say, an adolescent and said, and promoted its aggressive use for revenge against bullies, whether by its messaging or branding, you know how that marketing works, and featured it in some trial run, like a video game of indiscriminately killing people, you know, that definitely, I would say, would be actionable. In terms of the hypothetical, leaving, you know, without, you know, a little more facts based on what you said, I guess I'd say, I just, it's almost a little bit like the Bears, like it's never going to happen. It's one of those things where we have things that have happened in our lifetimes. Sadly, here in Connecticut, we don't have to hypothesize about what could happen. We've seen it, versus things that will never happen. And that's, I think, you have to understand, sir, I'm just like, I'm trying to figure out how this works in real life. And I deal with statutes quite a bit and would never be in a situation, based on your hypothetical, to even think about looking at the statute.
Well, you,
and I don't mean to just any disrespect or anything.
you dismiss the possibility, but let's say you know, somebody who was concealed carrying without a permit in Connecticut, shoot somebody else, shoots a, I don't think, do you think it would be out of the realm of possibility that the victim would find an attorney in Connecticut that would bring suit against the firearms manufacturer who advertised for a concealed carry handgun and promoted constitutional carry?
Yes, I absolutely do, because lawyers, even people who do work that they're proud of and to help people, they do have to keep the lights on, and nobody wants to waste money on a case that would be that absurd. I mean, again, everything is depending on this particular fact. So I've added a few facts that could make something like that actionable, but you have all kinds of problems I could already rattle off without lawsuit. That if somebody called me with that hypothetical that you mentioned, I would politely listen to them. I would share my deepest sympathies for their loss, and I would tell them that you do not have a claim, and that I can't even recommend any lawyer in Connecticut that I could think of who would even spend minutes on this claim. I'm sorry. I mean, that's just that's my honest answer.
Okay, but would you agree with me that it's arguably covered by this language in the statute?
I'd have to hear more specifics, because we spend a lot of time, I mean, the amount of time we spend on statutes trying to figure out whether our facts meet or don't are very challenging in some cases. So that this would have to really depend on the facts, but I'm not trying to dodge the question, because I know, you know, I'll answer a question honestly that I know where you're headed, but only if I have to think about it. So.
Okay, now, what do you interpret the lines 55 through 56, where it says no firearms industry member shall advertise, market, or promote firearms industry products in this state? How do you interpret that?
Well, I think it's a good description with the right amount of clarity that prohibits firearms manufacturers from promoting or marketing their products in a way that basically increase risks of criminal activity, misuse, revenge. I'm trying to think of others. Loan, like, you know, if you looked at firearms manufacturers.
I hate to cut you off, but I'm specifically talking about where it says promoting firearms industry products in this state, regardless of
I
the
see.
other part of it. So I'm talking about the in this state. Does
Right.
does the advertising have to say this is specifically for Connecticut, or can it be nationwide, or, you know, if there's a TV station in another state and the signal gets into Connecticut, how do you interpret the promoting products in this state?
Well, excellent question. And that's exactly the type of thing where you can't, where, you know, that's why lawyers have to evaluate facts really carefully. It depends, but I would say you have what the most specific thing that it gives the kind of the rules of the road to these the gun industry is, hey, if you want to sell your products in Connecticut, all understand that Connecticut is asking you to act responsibly and not promote the risk that of misuse, not promote that the wrong people get the weapons like they often do, and so that you don't do anything to increase the risk at all. And in fact, you know, that doing so would decrease the risk. So it gives them, it depends on the marketing campaign, I guess, or the target audience, but certainly in everything that is Connecticut based. And then you have other issues. And I think, I mean, there's an analogy here, I believe, to like advertising you might see online, I think, for other products. Maybe it's beer. I've seen ads where it says, you know, not available in Connecticut, right? Or no, or the giving the print that makes it clear that, hey, we're responsibly, or rather we're advertising to these other states that don't have this law, but hey, Connecticut has a law that says advertise responsibly, don't promote risk. This is one of those things. I mean, I don't know. It's, you know, it's a challenging area, but I think you're kind of getting into a little bit of a 10th Amendment, maybe, you know, kind of issue, and other potential like interstate commerce issues. So I'm not suggesting that this is a super clear area of law, but I think in terms of giving clarity and telling the gun industry, we'd love to have you in Connecticut. Connecticut is actually really a storied state for the gun industry, and just if you wouldn't mind doing, you know, promoting things in a way that doesn't increase the risk of your products being misused or coveted, for that matter, by the wrong people, you know. So that's maybe not, you know, I think you've asked a very, very good, provocative question, and this is where, and the issues, especially in an increasingly complicated world that's interconnected, we're seeing a lot more issues about what laws apply, and you know, as you get into a situation, sort of like a choice of law, you know, all these things I thought I'd never use after law school, I thought I was done with them, but it's getting really, really complicated, not just in the gun industry. So again, not trying to punt the answer, but I think there's not, if you laid out a really specific fact pattern, you and I could probably, you know, work out like all the complications.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent questions.
Thank you, Representative. Comment or question from other members of the committee? Comment or question? If not, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
All right, Malini Parikh. Malini Parikh.
Hi. Distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Malini Parikh and I live in Guilford. I'm a junior in high school and the president of the Connecticut Against Gun Violence Youth Council. I am testifying in support of HB 7042, an act concerning implementation of the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act. I am also testifying in support of HB 7137 and in opposition to SB 1441, HB 7770, and HB 7194. Every time I hear about another shooting, another life lost, I ask myself, could this have been prevented? And often the answer is yes. If we're not doing everything in our control to prevent these horrifying acts of violence, then we are not doing all we can to protect our children. 9 out of 10 crime guns are traced back to just 5% of firearm dealers. This is not just a coincidence. It's a pattern of negligence that fuels the violence in our communities. Currently, federal law makes it extremely difficult to hold the gun industry accountable. This leaves victims and their families without justice and firearm industries complete freedom to repeat the same sales that may lead to the same devastating actions. HB 7042 would allow it so the industry faces consequences for reckless or illegal practices. It would establish clear legal standards and allow civil action against firearm industry members who fail to exercise reasonable control over their products. This means that gun manufacturers, dealers, and distributors must do their best to ensure that firearms do not end up in the hands of straw purchasers, traffickers, or those who should not have access to them. It also means that they must not market products that can easily be converted into illegal firearms. 9 other states, including New York, California, and Illinois, have already passed similar laws. Connecticut has long been a leader in common sense gun laws, and I believe that HB 7042 is the next step in ensuring that those who profit from firearms do not do so at the expense of our safety. This bill is not about infringing on lawful gun ownership. It's about ensuring that the companies that manufacture and sell firearms do so responsibly. It's about preventing the next senseless tragedy. It's about justice for victims and their families. As young people, we should not have to live in fear of gun violence every time we walk into our schools or through our neighborhoods. We should not have to wonder if the next life lost will be of a loved one. HB 7042 gives us a chance to demand accountability, prevent future harm, and create a safer Connecticut for all of us. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, and you have great timing. Comment or question from members of the committee? Comment or question? If not, thank you very much for joining us today and providing your testimony. George Austin. George Austin. Ruth Lero. Good afternoon. You have to turn the microphone on. Just push the button in front of you. There you go.
There you go. Okay, thank you. Hi, some very inspirational speakers here today, and I don't know if I have much more to add to that, but here goes. Okay, my name is Ruth Lero. I live in Kensington and am a supporter of Connecticut Against Gun Violence. I am testifying in support of HB 7042, an act concerning implementation of the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act. The gun industry is incredibly powerful and poorly regulated in my opinion. It is not being held accountable for negligent acts that cause injury or death to our citizens. We can change that in Connecticut by enacting HB 7042, which will allow us to file lawsuits against the gun industry and hold them accountable for their illegal conduct, incentivize them to do better, and give victims of gun violence a path to seek justice. I was once told that the most regulated industry in this country is the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm sure that we all are glad that they are. If harm is done to you by a medication, you have a right to take legal action. As a pharmacist, I have had to use care and diligence to ensure no harm is done to my patients by following an abundance of state, federal, and corporate regulations, as well as using my own professional expertise, reviewing your medical history, and weighing the benefits versus risks of any medication ordered for you. In addition, written information accompanies each medication dispense, and I must remain available for any questions that you might have.
Guns are the leading cause of childhood death in this country. So, shouldn't the gun industry be held equally accountable for their behavior? It is stated in the Hippocratic Oath that we swear before licensure as pharmacists to, above all, do no harm. I believe that most United States manufacturers feel that obligation to some degree as well. What incentivizes them to do so, in part, are regulations and laws. At present, the gun industry, which manufactures and distributes very dangerous and potentially lethal products, is not held to the same degree of accountability. It is treated differently, which disincentivizes it from having any moral obligation for the safety of our citizens or being held accountable for negligent and illegal behavior. There are already 9 states, and I won't list them all, that have laws similar to HB 7042. These laws have reduced gun crimes and incentivized gun manufacturers to behave responsibly. I encourage the Connecticut legislature to join these states and support HB 7042, which will hold the Connecticut gun industry accountable for illegal behavior and allow victims that are harmed from their illegal practices a pathway to justice. And I want to thank all of the legislators in Connecticut who continue to support legislation to prevent gun violence in our communities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Comment or question from members of the committee? Comment or question, Representative Howard?
Thank you, ma'am. Do you say you're a pharmacist?
Yes.
So a lot of discussion from the gun shop owners has been their concern over increased insurance costs. You've heard that today. That's been discussed. There's a lot of discussion in this legislature and across the country about high costs of healthcare, and a lot of people say that one of the reasons that healthcare costs are so high is because of high insurance for malpractice and things like that. Would you agree that that's a participating factor into why healthcare and pharmaceutical costs are so high?
Okay, the reason why healthcare insurance or insurance in general is so high, the malpractice type, is because of what?
So when we talk about healthcare in this building,
right,
and in this country, some people say that one of the main reasons that healthcare costs is so high is because of high costs of insurance, because people are suing healthcare providers all the time. They're suing pharmacists, et cetera, and that's driving the healthcare providers' cost overhead up, and therefore drives the healthcare cost. Do you think that that argument has validity?
I have not experienced that, but I can tell you that the more responsible you are, and the more you have regulations behind you and laws behind you that you follow, there shouldn't be a problem. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do,
But
yeah.
if you're left to your own, decision process, it's definitely easier to trip you up on that.
I understand. I guess what I'm driving at is I'm trying to determine if the statements of the gun shop owners that this is going to increase their cost of doing business is a valid concern. You likened regulations to the pharmacy industry, and that's I'm just asking you
Right.
if you feel that the high regulation and the high aptitude for litigation in the pharmacy industry contributes to the high cost of medication. But it seems like you're saying no, it doesn't.
No, and I guess what you'd really need is a good study that is, that can meet that out.
Do you suggest that we turn this bill into a study?
Not particularly.
Thank you, ma'am. I
No.
appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Comment or question from members of the committee? Comment or question? Seeing none. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Stefan Liska. I see Stefan in our list. Stefan Liska. Okay. Jake McGuigan.
Hello? Hello?
I'll just stay here and wait.
Hello?
Yeah,
Hello?
Mr. Lit.
Hello?
Mr.
Yes, yes, hello? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
We're gonna let you testify. If it's possible to turn your camera on, can you do that as well?
Uh,
If
I'm
not, I
gonna,
understand you may have some
hit-
issues with technology. That's okay.
yeah, I've got some technology issues here. I thought I set it up right.
Go.
Okay, just very quickly, because I only have 3 minutes. I oppose HB 7042. I feel it's very punitive to the entire firearms industry, and I haven't really seen any hard evidence because I've been watching this since 10 a.m. To change my mind on that. I oppose 8037 and especially section 4 because it creates that merchant category code, which can also be punitive. I support HB 7194, the transfer of large capacity magazines and so-called
Sir, are you
assault
still
weapons
there?
because the registered and everybody's, yeah, can you hear me? Oh shit, hang on.
Mr. Liska?
Oh, what the? Hang on, hang on, hang on, hang on.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
just hang
Unfortunately,
on.
I think the
Oh,
technology issues are too much just to overcome. So we are going to move to Jake McGuigan.
hello?
Oh, he's back.
Yeah,
Sir, are you there?
unmute. You can hear me now, right? Yes, unmute. Oh, oh, hello? Hello. All right, you can hear me now, correct? Yes. Hello? Oh, man. Hello? Hello?
As if they're spending $1,000 on firearms, ammunition, but in fact, it could be a safe or various other things at a retailer. As to 7042, we've got this
written testimony in there, but I want to point out just quickly that this is really an attempt to use the Connecticut judiciary system to regulate the interstate commerce of firearms. Heavily regulated both with federal and state laws. No other industry that has been addressed or used as examples here today have the extensive federal regulations and controls in place, with both states doing it, the state of Connecticut doing inspections, as well as the ATF. So I continue to hear nonstop today that the firearms industry is not accountable. We are accountable, and we have basically standards in place and controls in place that are federally regulated and regulated by the state of Connecticut. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Comment or question from members of the committee, Representative Dubitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in. You said there are a couple of states that have mandated the use of this code. Do you know what states those are?
Yes, currently it is California, New York, and Colorado. There is pending legislation here, obviously in Connecticut, as well as Delaware right now with pending legislation on the MCC code.
Do you know how the information that is collected using that code is used?
We don't right now, but we believe in the future there will be a concern as to how that's being used to identify law-abiding citizens purchasing, right? Let's assume we have a shooter that will go to the range on a weekend and shoot 1,000 rounds of ammunition. Well, someone that's not familiar with the industry or with shooting sports would say, well, that's a lot of rounds of ammunition. Why are they buying 1,000 rounds? Does that create a red flag? So I believe this would be a first step, and not to use the example that we always do, but the camel's nose under the tent to push forward. And once you get this MCC code in, the next one would be, let's try to itemize what's in that cart when they check out of that store. Because right now, it'll only be, you're a firearms retailer and such spent $5,000 there, but you don't know what that $5,000 is made up of. In the future, it may change that.
Do you know who has access to that data?
The data is, the credit card processing is somewhat complicated. Well, you say you have data processes, you have banks, and then you also have the credit card companies themselves. So you would have numerous channels within that would have access to that data. Very similar to, like, if you're at the year end and you get your credit card statement, and you can look at your purchases over the year. It'll say you spent this on groceries, you spent this on that. So, so that's the goal at the end of the day, is to create a firearms retailer code, not necessarily for putting purchases on a pie chart at the end of the year to say that you spent this much on guns, because some people's significant others may get angry with that, but more for in the future to actually determine what they would consider high-risk purchases, large quantity purchases. And again, we're in the state of Connecticut, where it is already very highly regulated as to what consumers can purchase with a pistol permit, ammunition certificate, various other things. So I don't see the necessity, knowing that the state is aware of the purchases that are already occurring.
Do you know if any of those states maintain any type of extra security on that data, other than other than perhaps if you're going to buy a shovel, or if you're going to buy candy, there probably isn't much security on that information. I'm sure it's sold all over the place. With regard to this particular information, do you know if any of those states maintain any special security on it?
I'm not aware of it, and I doubt very much that there would be any higher level of security than any other category code that is created. And I think the issue that you do have is, and we have seen in discussions with card companies, is that you have processing centers in different locations. So what would happen if a transaction were to occur in, a state that has a prohibition of it, but the resident is of a state that it mandates it, or vice versa? You're a Visa and you have a data processing in a state that mandates the use of the code, yet the transactions occurring in the state where it's prohibited. So there are concerns, from a larger industry standpoint. as to how that's going to be addressed with respect to that.
One would also think that if you came from another state into Connecticut, and let's say you purchased a holster, which is perfectly legal for out-of-state people to purchase, suddenly this number is on your record, your data. I could see that being a significant problem for people in other states. Are you an attorney?
I am not.
You're not, because I could see some interstate commerce issues and
That has been brought up in some of my written testimony and others, but you are correct in the concern of that and privacy issues as you alluded to with the data privacy. Obviously, I think there's every other day where somebody's getting an email saying that there's a data privacy breach with respect to retailers or various other things, and the concern is that does this create essentially a financial gun registry from a financial industry standpoint?
now, you're with National Shooting Sports Foundation, right?
Yes, Representative.
So your members are gun retailers?
So our members are manufacturers,
Uh-huh.
retailers, and ranges. So, and our retailers are both big box stores such as a Cabral, as well as a small independent retailers that a few of them have spoken today.
7042. Were this bill to pass, what would you tell your members to do differently than they're doing today?
There is nothing outlined in this bill that would allow us to tell them or to direct them to do anything differently, because it's pretty open-ended the way the bill is currently written. I have in quotes reasonable controls, and I know you have addressed that and had questions as to exactly what that is. The concern is we have seen it in other states, as they've mentioned, 9 other states have done this, and in full disclosure, NSSF has challenged legally some of these laws, or most of these laws in the other states, and few of them we've been thrown out for not having standard because they haven't actually used the law yet. So I can't speak to what the decision would be here in the state of Connecticut. But we have seen recently, state of New Jersey specifically, going after a manufacturer saying that there are design flaws with their manufacturing of their firearm, and using essentially a bill similar to this to go after the manufacturer.
Okay. I know you're not an attorney, but what's your understanding of the interaction between a law like this and the federal FLACA law?
So again, I do have that in my testimony, but I think, again, if there is a manufacturer defect, they can obviously bring forth lawsuits. There are six exceptions to the PLACA law that passed on the federal level. The concern is that this becomes starting to talk about public nuisance, the criminal misuse of a firearm. I attribute it to something very similar, and you would probably have this whole room filled, but assuming that you would say that drunk driving is a public nuisance and a crash occurs on 84, and then all of a sudden a tort lawyer or trial lawyer comes in and attacks both the manufacturer, the car dealership, and anything else along the line, maybe even anyone that serviced that said vehicle, because of the criminal misuse of that individual. So that's where the concern lies with 7042, is how it will be used to go against innocent retailers that are abiding by the law, both the federal law and the state law. These quote unquote bad actors, which we heard about all day today from others, they would not have a license, and majority of them do not have licenses if they are doing anything what's federally regulated or regulated by the state.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Comment or question from members of the committee? Comment or question? Seeing none. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you, Chair Winfield. Have a good day.
Laha Kurjiaka. Hope I didn't destroy that name. Nope, I don't see him. Rob Sampson.
Good afternoon, co-chairs Winfield and Staffstrom, members Kissel and Fishbein, and the distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Rob Sampson, and I'm here because I strongly oppose House Bill 7042, an act concerning implementation of the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act. In my view, this is not a legitimate attempt to increase accountability within the firearm industry. Rather, it is a calculated assault on lawful commerce, personal responsibility, and the Second Amendment. This bill dangerously expands a precedent set by the Soto v. Bushmaster case. By imposing vague, subjective liability standards, it ensures an endless barrage of lawsuits against manufacturers and retailers, even when they fully comply with the law. This is not about addressing misconduct. It is about attempting to eliminate an entire industry through legal attrition. This bill goes way beyond the advertising liability that was in Soto, creating a sweeping, undefined legal framework that would make it nearly impossible for the firearms industry to operate in our state of Connecticut. Holding manufacturers and retailers responsible for the criminal misuse of their products by third parties is a direct assault on the foundational American principle of personal responsibility. By this logic, should car manufacturers be sued when reckless drivers cause accidents? Should baseball bat companies be liable if a bat is used in an assault? Should gasoline companies be sued if their product is used to commit arson? Should hardware stores be responsible if a criminal misuses a hammer, a saw, rope, or bleach, or countless things that could be used to cause harm? This bill erodes personal responsibility and invites limitless, frivolous litigation, driving lawful businesses into the ground. This bill's language is alarmingly broad and deliberately ambiguous. It requires firearm businesses to implement quote unquote reasonable controls to prevent unlawful use, and without defining what those controls are. It demands that manufacturers prevent basically any public safety threat, exposing them to lawsuits for actions entirely outside their control. These provisions manufacture liability out of thin air and set an impossible compliance standard. The penalties in the bill are also excessive and punitive. It allows courts to impose crushing financial penalties, far exceeding any actual harm. Worse, it forces businesses to pay the legal fees of those suing them, encouraging frivolous lawsuits and turning the legal system into a bludgeon against lawful and legal enterprise. Beyond being unjust, this bill is counterproductive to public safety. Studies consistently show that lawful gun ownership reduces crime. I submitted a number of examples in my testimony, but by crippling the firearms industry and restricting access to legal gun ownership, this bill will have the opposite effect of its stated intent. It will increase crime by making self-defense less accessible. In my view, this is part of a broader agenda that has already weakened Connecticut's criminal justice system. Instead of holding criminals accountable, this bill shifts blame onto law-abiding businesses and responsible citizens.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Senator Kissel.
Thank you very much, Chairman Winfield. Senator Sampson, great to see you, our former member. Just a couple days ago, we lost you on this committee. Our loss and the other committee's gains. But just a couple quick points. First of all, there was a nice gentleman that agreed with me from the Connecticut Citizens Defense League that we're in the top 3 as far as gun regulations. Some want to call it gun safety, but certainly we're not a Wild West kind of state by any stretch of the imagination. Would you agree that Connecticut is in the top 3 as far as highly regulated gun control states?
Yeah, Senator, I'm not entirely positive what the laws are in every one of our neighboring 49 states, but I do understand that Connecticut certainly stands out as having more gun control than other places. The legislation that I've seen just in my tenure in the legislature, in my view, has been egregious, has violated the rights of citizens. It has purposely, gone against the Second Amendment. I don't know a better way to say it than that. And not with any beneficial effect. I don't believe it has resulted in more public safety or any additional benefit to Connecticut residents, and certainly not to law-abiding gun owners who, were forced initially to have to stand in a line in the freezing cold back in the spring of 2014 to register their firearm, something that they never considered that they would have to do. They had to register their magazines, and people to this day are restricted from purchasing items that are lawful, in most of the other states. So yes, Connecticut is definitely a standout as far as egregious gun control legislation.
And this next question, it may take some further research, but I can already hear the arguments from the advocates for this bill that may be on this committee saying, well, this is legislation that's passed in, I believe, 9 other states. We've received no testimony that businesses or gun sellers went out of business, that they can't afford insurance. It's just the old sky is falling arguments. And I'm just wondering if you're aware of any evidence that there's deleterious consequences, probably unintended, but maybe by the advocates that want to see no guns in America, maybe intended. But one of the things that will certainly help my arguments in opposition to this bill would be any of the negative consequences to the passage of these bills in other states. And I don't know if you're aware of anything or if you're willing to try to muster up some evidence so we have some, no pun intended, so that I have some ammunition regarding this.
Senator, frankly, I don't have any information about other states. It's something that's commonly said, oh, this is passed in, a bunch of other states. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, I don't really know if that's true in most cases, because just because you say something's passed in another state doesn't mean that the language of the bill is the same. I could make a few tweaks to this bill and improve it dramatically. I mean, just the fact that this bill effectively creates an arbitrary requirement for members of the firearm industry to establish, implement, and enforce reasonable controls without ever determining what those are. And then later comes back in the language of the bill to, put that back onto the firearm industry members that they failed to provide reasonable controls. Again, without any definition, something that opens a door, in fact, a hole you could drive a Mack truck through, in my view, to create a litigious, reaction. I think people will be suing more and more often.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Sampson. I really appreciate it. And Representative Dubitsky and Ranking Member Fishbein raised the idea of open carry. Some people would say, oh, that's, terrible. And if I saw that at, in a restaurant or a drugstore, I'd be afraid. But many consequences, when bad things happen in other parts of the country, it's the person that had a rapid ability to use a handgun that stopped like a whole horror show of bad things happening in quick succession. And so really, what is a reasonable prevention of deleterious consequences or behavior is in the eye of the beholder in many respects, especially when it comes to guns. Guns is one of those issues, like abortion, like other things in our state and nation, that people have strong opinions on both sides of the issue. And reasonable people can take reasonable positions on either side. But certainly I could understand the concerns by the advocates if we were way behind other states, but we're not. I firmly believe we're around third and only behind California and either New Jersey or one of those other states. So thank you so much, Senator. You are one of the champions for the Second Amendment, and very much appreciate your time and testimony. Thank you, Chairman Winfield.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Senator. I think this is the first opportunity we've had since I've been up here and you've been up here. And
It's my pleasure.
well, I say that, Senator Kissel was talking about a loss. I think the gain actually is you having the ability to come to our committee, your former committee, and have this exchange. I think that is very refreshing for the process. Senator Kissel asked you about information about businesses that had gone out of business. I think it's only natural that if you take, let's take another industry, let's take the vaccine industry, right? And compare it to the firearm industry. And if we say to the vaccine industry, you know, you can't be sued, you know, even though government forces people to use your product, even if they die, you can't be sued. And then we say to the firearm industry, you have to go through all these hoops and all of these challenges, and somebody's looking to enter one of those two industries. Naturally, you would have more vaccine people than you would in the firearms business. And, you know, unfortunately, as we hear today, negative impact upon gun owners, negative impact upon gun manufacturers, negative impact upon gun sellers. At the end of the day, there's some people perhaps in this room that are saying good. And that's unfortunate.
Indeed.
Because I think that's the intent ultimately of a lot of these laws. Certainly we're not safer after all of these things. If we were safer, then you wouldn't pick up the newspaper and read about a shooting in New Haven last weekend and a shooting in Bridgeport the weekend before, many times with illegal guns that are not even addressed really by this legislation. So, you know, that's just the simple fact of the matter. And once again, I thank you for coming here today.
Can I react to your comment?
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you if you had any other points that you wanted to make to us about the legislation.
Thank you very much, Representative. And again, it's truly my pleasure to actually be able to sit in this chair across from this distinguished committee and be able to, you know, provide testimony as an expert on the subject of the Second Amendment. Let me just say this, a couple things. You know, we've talked a little bit about our station as far as where we stand with regard to gun control legislation nationally. I don't know if we're first. I don't know if we're second. I don't know if we're third. I don't know that it even matters. For me, there has been no discernible benefit from a public safety standpoint. I'll remember shortly after the Sandy Hook legislation was passed, maybe the next year or the year after that, I remember there was a case where someone was arrested for having a AR-15 in the backseat of a car. And I remember the Malloy administration at the time putting out all kinds of press. There was a full court press on, look at, you know, how great our laws are. We stopped somebody, they had an AR-15 and everything else. And I thought to myself, I mean, like, what greater proof that your series of laws didn't work? The whole idea behind the laws passed in the wake of Sandy Hook was to prevent these, you know, assault weapons from being readily available and prevalent in our society. And here's an example of the fact that there's one in the backseat of a parking lot in downtown New Haven or wherever it was. You know, so I don't know that these things have ever worked. In my view, gun control legislation simply, you know, is using a bomb to drive a nail instead of a hammer. And what it does is has the impact of harming the rights of law-abiding citizens, the same exact people that would, you know, prevent crime, would run into a building to save children, for example. Most of the gun owners I know are good, decent people. They possess a firearm, they own one for their own protection and for the mutual protection of their friends, neighbors, and the rest of our society. And the statistics bear that out. The fact of the matter is, it's been studied over and over again, how many crimes are thwarted just because people actually possess firearms. I argue all the time that in my district, there's a very low crime rate in the cities of Prospect and Wolcott, for example, because there's a very high prevalence of gun ownership. The fact of the matter is criminals don't go there to break in and steal things because the likelihood of running into an armed homeowner is much more significant. I really like what you mentioned about vaccines, Representative, because that is like a totally different world. You know, we're used to a situation where companies are held responsible for the products that they produce. And that's right. You know, if you manufacture children's toys and, you know, it contains lead or it's damaging or it can hurt a child or something like that, we should hold people responsible for that. You know, if you manufacture a car and something goes wrong with the brakes on a series of, you know, of vehicles in a particular model, they have a recall, you know, and they can be held responsible for that. That's perfectly normal. The situation with vaccines is crazy because here you are, they can't even be held liable for their actual product the way it is. And here in this bill, what we're asking is to hold people that manufacture and retail firearms to be responsible for their product, not when it's used correctly, But when it's purposely misused by someone, which is just an absurdity, how can you hold that responsibility over someone without even putting any guardrails to determine what that is? One of my fears about this bill is that while this state legislature continues to pass policy effectively erasing history, erasing criminal records, and saying, it doesn't matter, your past life is irrelevant. On the other hand, we're telling gun retailers that they have to actually proactively discriminate against their customers based on their subjective view that somehow there might be a risk posed by making a sale. That to me is an extreme stretch. You cannot, as a legislature, put that on private citizens and an entire industry. It's unfair and it's explicit in this bill. And I understand the advocates who are coming here to promote this policy, from a safety standpoint. And many of the examples they use are quite reasonable. But I think in almost every one of those reasonable examples, there's already laws being violated and broken and a way to prosecute people for, violating those laws. This is creating an entirely different standard, an unachievable standard in my view, and one that I think is a tremendous stretch. And I'll just say one more thing about that, which is, the conversation that has been about accessories, for example. Every time an accessory was mentioned during the debate earlier today, it was always brought up that, well, that's not likely to happen. I don't think that would be actionable. Well, this particular legislation stems from the Bushmaster v. Soto case. And in my view, that is a lawsuit about suing a firearm manufacturer for advertising that in no way encouraged any criminal behavior or any type of negative activity at all, simply was celebrating the quality of their product. If that can be stretched into a viable lawsuit, then this bill, which is, in my view, 1,000 times more wide open, is going to mean a lot more damage to gun manufacturers and retailers.
I appreciate, one of the benefits to your knowledge coming before us, because the possible discriminatory aspect of a sale, I hadn't really even thought about. So I really appreciate that. If a gun seller is looking at two potential purchasers and the law puts the onus on them to scrutinize that individual, even though government has approved of the transaction, that could become problematic because that seller may have an internal bias, right? And we would hope that that wouldn't happen. But, if I go to a gun store and, because, I've got the last name Fishbein, right? And people think I'm Jewish, but I'm not. I have Jewish roots, and that particular gun seller doesn't want, people with Jewish roots to have firearms, they could use this as a shield. I think that individual is going to do bad with that. I don't want the liability, even though the government has approved the transaction. So no, I very much appreciate that because it's something I didn't think about before. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson, welcome back to the committee that you've been off for 5 days now. You said you could make some tweaks to this. Might understand if this were to come before you on the Senate, you may be able to imagine an amendment or two.
I might have a few amendments. I would probably start with the language about what a firearm is, what an unfinished frame or lower receiver is. Several years ago, we had this crazy debate about ghost guns, where at the end of the day, the law that was passed really didn't define what a firearm is outside of intent. And I made a joke, I remember debating with Senator Winfield on the floor of the Senate, that I have a big giant boulder in the front of my house. And, is that a firearm? Yes or no? And the fact is that based on the wording of the bill, if I intended to break up that big boulder and pull the metal alloys out of it and turn it into a firearm, I think it could be categorized that way based on the language in the bill. That's absurd. And much like the discussion we just had about, what are reasonable controls, putting that on the firearm manufacturer and retailer is absurd. That's the role of the state government. The state government already establishes when they think it's lawful to sell someone a gun. a next background check, for example, or if you meet the age requirement, et cetera. We're already setting those parameters. So why are we going to add this new subjective and arbitrary parameter that effectively could get people sued? Do you think this person is a risk? Now you're putting that in the position of the firearm retailer. I think it's just a great way to cause litigation and put good and innocent people in harm's way.
When you write legislation here, which you do and you have for years, do you think the definition of firearm as defined in 53A3 includes BB guns?
That's a good question. I'm not looking at 53-A3.
Well,
I think it could.
I'll tell you that it's defined in statute as something that a shot can be fired from. The Supreme Court has heard a case this just argued last year in a home invasion, and they determined that an airsoft gun was not a firearm by definition because there was no CO2 cartridge in it, and that particular firearm had been wrapped significantly with like duct tape or something, and the court said that you couldn't reasonably get that thing to fire a shot very quickly, and therefore it wasn't a firearm, which would lead me to wonder if there was a CO2 cartridge in it, does it fit the definition of firearm? I don't know if you have an opinion on that court case or how we define it, because firearm, it just says here, firearm is defined in 53A-3, and I'm just wondering, do you think that could include BB guns?
Through you to the good representative, delighted to have our first conversation in this type of role as well, Representative. But based on that definition, I don't see how you could see otherwise. And I would also argue that's the danger of our court system. Our court system, when laws are presented to them that are not clear. In my view, we should write laws that are absolutely crystal clear. They apply to everyone equally, that anyone reading it is going to understand it very, very clearly. When we have ambiguous legislation, we say reasonable controls without specifying what they are, and we're leaving that up to a court, then a court's going to decide. The problem is that the court's not always going to decide correctly. They're going to make assumptions. They're going to make errors. I think that they erred in the Soto v. Bushmaster case by suggesting that somehow the threshold of violating our Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act was met by suggesting that somebody's advertising for firearms could be used, to advance that case. And I believe that the definitions that exist in our laws for firearm, and particularly unfinished firearms, I think are extremely broad and can be interpreted in 1,000 ways. A different court could have said that airsoft rifle was indeed a firearm. And I think you've indeed, as you mentioned, Representative, the door is now open to say if a CO2 cartridge is involved, like in most BB guns, it's going to be called a firearm based on that precedent.
So you've mentioned reasonable controls multiple times. You have the bill with you?
Yes.
So it starts in line 25, and you said it's not defined. I mean, the bill does attempt to define. I think what you mean is it's not well defined, right?
That's correct.
So like if you look at line 27, right, prevent the sale, distribution of a firearm industry product to a straw purchaser. Do straw purchasers walk into firearm stores with a sign that says I'm a straw purchaser? I mean, how is a gun shop owner to know someone is a straw purchaser?
This is a perfect example, Representative. If they had said to someone known to them to be a straw purchaser, then that might be something legitimate to put in this bill. But as you pointed out, straw purchasers do not announce themselves typically. And we're having a major debate about lawsuits involving the Mexican cartels right now, suggesting that somehow there were straw purchases being made in the U.S. that are funneling guns to the cartels. And I think there's new evidence coming out every day saying that it was actually the Mexican government that was purchasing those weapons. Were they in fact the straw purchaser? And how could you hold a gun retailer, in the southwest of our country responsible when they're selling to a government entity? So again, putting some legitimate framework around policy definitely makes a difference. And when you hold somebody responsible to selling to a straw purchaser without also requiring that they knew it was a straw purchaser, for me is a non-starter. It shows just another way to put people in the crossfire and make them guilty even when they're completely innocent.
Well, the legislation, as I read it, to your point, it doesn't require that they somehow knew, but in fact, in line 82, it says there shall be a rebuttable presumption that the firearm industry member failed to implement reasonable controls if they did certain things on here that seem to reference back to this section. And go, you agree that's a problem? I mean, we're creating legislation telling the court that we're basically, if this suit comes and the firearm dealer, we're putting them in a less starting point, right? Don't you agree?
Yes, it's a circular argument in the bill. In lines 80 and 81, it says, in an action alleging that a firearm industry member failed to establish, implement, and enforce reasonable controls, it goes on to say there shall be a rebuttable presumption. And then it goes on in line 87 and 88 to say that they could have established and implemented and enforced reasonable controls. I mean, again, it never defines what those things are. That would be left up to a court at some point in the future. And I'm not confident that a court's going to get it right. I don't think they got it right in that Soto case. I don't think they got it right with the CO2 cartridge. And I don't think that they're going to get it right either. I mean, sad to say, but I've seen far too much political activism in our courts in Connecticut as it is. I don't want to see any more. And I don't want to send them laws that leave this building that are incomplete, that give them the power to interpret what is acceptable. I think we should do that on our end. That's our job, to write clear laws that apply to everyone in a very equal manner that people understand.
And staying back in that same reasonable controls definition here, it also talks about that they have to prevent the sale to a firearm trafficker. Now, we worked together on firearms trafficking laws a couple of years ago, which is a C or B felony. Would you agree with me that that's already an existing law, that you can't sell to a firearms trafficker?
Yes, without a doubt.
Because a firearms trafficker, you know, we talk a lot about due process here, and to be called a firearms trafficker, one would assume you must have been convicted of firearms trafficking, which is a C or B felony, which is already a disqualifier, right? And then the other question I wanted to ask, because, you know, I know you follow this stuff pretty closely, and Rep. Dubitsky talked about this at length with a previous person. In line 57, it says promotes a risk to public safety. Would you agree with me that risk to public safety is extremely broad, ambiguous, and subjective?
Yes. In fact, when I first saw the language of the bill, that is the very first thing that I highlighted that stuck out to me, because who's to determine what a risk to public safety is? Certainly, in this particular case where you're asking the manufacturer or retailer to be clairvoyant, they would have to know that in advance. And maybe they couldn't possibly know that. Maybe they're selling a firearm, as was mentioned, many examples today, you know, someone that was depressed that was going to commit suicide. I mean, how could you even put that on the gun store owner to make a determination like that? You know, they're not, I mean, are we going to be providing, government funded training for gun store, the counter guy there to be able to diagnose mental illness? It's an absurdity. We are responsible in the legislature to put together, again, I mean, I hate to repeat myself, but laws that are clear, that people can follow. I don't think that you can follow this law as a gun manufacturer, and certainly not as a retailer. I think it's even harder for a retailer reading it without making mistakes. You're either going to engage in discriminating against people you shouldn't have, or you're going to let people slip through the cracks, because there is no definition that you can find in the bill. And again, I mean, it's absurd to even put this on someone as if, constituents across the state and people that are in this industry are going to be able to go through this bill language as we are today and have a full grasp of what they're supposed to do.
You've been on the Judiciary Committee for a long time. You've heard a lot of testimony. I'm a police officer in my day-to-day life, as you well know. How many people have come before you in the Judiciary Committee and testified that my existence is a risk to public safety?
That's a good question. A few.
The point is, it's subjective, right? It's up to an individual's interpretation as to what a risk to public safety is. I think there's a lot of people who say that police officers present is an asset to public safety, but there's a lot of people who think it's a risk to public safety. That's sort of my point. Jumping down to line 66, a person who has suffered harm. You've read a lot of legislation, you've written a lot of legislation. What does harm exactly mean? Because people are harmed by words, people are harmed by signs, people are harmed by other people's thoughts. Do you have concern over the word harm?
I think it's a broad term. I know for certain it's not defined in the bill. I don't know if it's defined elsewhere in statute, but I think that it could be used in a court to mean a whole lot of things. It could be you were harmed financially. It could mean your ego was harmed, for crying out loud, as far as reading the plain language of the bill. You know, without definitions, without clarity, I think that you're creating a environment that is completely hostile to this industry.
The next line, 68 to 69. So this is talking about who can bring action, right? And it says the corporation counsel or chief legal officer of a municipality in the name of the municipality can bring action. But it doesn't seem to indicate that anything must have happened. So does that mean that a municipality who feels that a firearms owner is not doing things the way they want them to do it, they can just sue them?
I think there are a few other requirements in the bill, to be fair, before a municipality could go forward and have a legitimate case. But I don't think it would take much for them to have a legitimate case under this bill because of its broad definitions. But it does beg the question, why is that in there? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. If you're effectively, this bill says that a person that was harmed, quote unquote, as we discussed, a municipal leader and the attorney general. Those are the three entities that are allowed to bring an action under this legislation. And I mean, we've seen this before. I mean, this is effectively using the force of the state government or a municipal government to infringe on the rights of people that engage in a perfectly lawful industry. And we've seen this over and over again, that folks that are Second Amendment advocates, people that manufacture and sell guns, in my view, they don't have the same rights as people that sell other products. They are forever behind the eight ball, having to defend themselves. And this is just another and very egregious example of that.
Senator, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the way that you go through these bills. And I have great trust that out of 109 lines in this bill, should it see the floor of the lesser of the chambers where you reside, there's probably at least 109 amendments. So I would encourage my colleagues to be prepared for that. Thank you for your work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us again. I didn't recognize it was 5 days. It feels like you were here just yesterday. I mean it that way. So thank you very much. And I would encourage, if we are serious, since you have the knowledge you have, that I would consider the amendments. So hopefully that comes earlier in the process rather than later when there's very little that we can do about it. Having said that, it is good to see you and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Much
Okay.
appreciated. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Roy Downey. Roy Downey. Okay, if not, Martin Isaac.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I do.
Thank you very much. Distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Martin Isaac and I live in Trumbull, Connecticut. I am a longtime board member with Connecticut Against Gun Violence, and I am here testifying in favor of HB 7042. The passage of this act is a crucial step towards ensuring public safety by holding firearm industry members accountable for their role in preventing gun violence. This act establishes clear standards of conduct within our state, offering a vital mechanism for victims and the state to seek recourse when these standards are violated. One quick note, I just want to mention, there were comments regarding our state laws, and it's clear that we do have very strong state laws, and it also follows that we have one of the lowest gun deaths per capita in the country. That is not a coincidence. It's also clear there's overwhelming evidence that shows that firearm ownership and access is associated with increased suicide, homicide, unintentional firearm deaths, and injuries. I'll be happy to share sources for that information as well. Currently, the firearm industry often operates under a unique set of rules that limits its responsibility for the harms caused by its products. Unlike most other industries, the gun industry has enjoyed broad exemptions from civil liability. PLACA, which was enacted in 2005, has been interpreted by some courts to extensively limit the ability of individuals and entities to sue firearm manufacturers, sellers, and importers for harm resulting from the criminal or unlawful use of their products. This lack of accountability can disincentivize the industry from adopting safer practices and taking steps to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. While PLACA provides broad immunity, it does include exceptions, such as when a firearm industry member knowingly violates a state or federal statute applicable to the sale or marketing of firearms, and this violation causes harm. This act is designed to establish clear statutory duties for the firearm industry within Connecticut, thereby strengthening the basis for accountability under this exception. Several states have already taken action to address this accountability. We've talked about them. There are 9 states that have acted to expand the ability of victims and public officials to bring civil lawsuits against the firearm industry for illegal conduct, often focusing on established standards of reasonable conduct and responsible marketing. This act aligns with that growing national trend towards ensuring the firearm industry operates responsibly and is held accountable for actions that contribute to gun violence. The Firearm Industry Responsibility Act is a necessary and responsible measure to protect our communities. By establishing clear standards of conduct and providing avenues for legal recourse, this act will incentivize the firearm industry to adopt safer practices and take greater responsibility for preventing gun violence. I urge you to support this critical legislation and take a significant step towards enhancing public safety in our state. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Comment or question from members of the committee? Comment or question from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for joining us today. At this point, if there's anyone who was signed up who didn't get a chance to testify, what is your name? No, I missed the name. Thea? Yep, I have you. Come down.
You signed up.
10.
I apologize, but I did schedule the tour tomorrow.
It's okay, it happens.
Hope it was a good tour.
It was. Thank you. So, good afternoon, Honorable Chairman and Honorable Committee members. My name is Thea Alphys. I'm a Christian, a mom, a veteran, and a member of CCDL. My MOS was security police, and I worked in the private sector as well in security, and then moved on to emergency medical services here in Connecticut for 20 years. I know 2 things from my experience. First, guns are an appropriate deterrent in the hands of good people. Second, bad people do terrible things to good people with significant indifference that escalates the longer they go without being held accountable. First, I support HB 7070. My first duty is to God, who abhors the shedding of innocent blood, only made more abhorrent that it happened in his house during worship. Biblically, I believe it is my duty to act if I can safely, to eliminate a violent threat to life, especially my own or my children's. Fleeing means to turn my back on that threat, which in likelihood increases my chance of being killed and my children as well. Sad if I could have prevented it. Passing this bill adheres to the First Amendment of worship regarding my obedience to God, which is to defend innocent life. So I support HB 7070. I oppose 7042, and I'm astonished by a clear inaccountability for criminals that gets written into these bills and laws, along with persecution of law-abiding citizens. HB 7042 targets the livelihood of law-abiding citizens, threatens our Second Amendment, access to firearms should stores and manufacturers be sued, and they will be. Their doors will be closed, businesses and lives destroyed. And in the meantime, criminals are again not accountable. How many times do we have to see violent offenders released? Numerous previous arrests, crimes escalating as they get emboldened by these bills that are willing to place blame elsewhere. HB 7042 places the blame on people who had nothing to do with the actual crime, and pretending that this attains any kind of justice is a falsehood. If thou wouldst rule well, thou must rule for God. And to do that, thou must be ruled by him. Those who will not be governed by God will be ruled by tyrants. That was William Penn.
Thank you, Ms. Elvis. Comment,
Thank you.
question from, comment or question from members of the committee. Representative Howard.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for sticking it out for the whole day. You know, you sound to me like you're frustrated. Is that a fair word?
Yes,
Why are you frustrated?
because I love my country, I love my family, I love this state.
And
I'm frustrated because I feel like it doesn't protect me or my children, and it wants to hold me accountable. I'm frustrated because I feel like, in the intent to do something good, to do what's righteous, that I'll be found a criminal. And for what? Protecting my son? Protecting my life? I'm not a bad person. I've held guns in my hand since I was 14 years old and took a hunter safety class in school at an agricultural high school. I've never had to use one. I thank God for that. I want to pass on to heaven, never having to use a weapon and take a life. I spent my whole career saving lives, but I also spent my whole career seeing what people are willing to do sometimes to other people and getting there after it was too late and trying to clean up a bloody mess, and frustrated that in an ambulance I could go back time and time again and pick up the same people, the same gang members that committed violent shootings, violent stabbings. How in the world were they out on the street a week later to do it again? I don't want to see people, good people, become felons because we're not writing our laws to help good people and to put away bad people. Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean that wholeheartedly. You know, you talked about criminals not being held accountable. Are you talking about stuff like 96 out of 103 charges for illegally transferring a pistol or revolver and 22 being nollied or dismissed? Is that the kind of stuff that frustrates you?
No, the stuff that I'm referring to are the criminals that are arrested by good cops and then released by bad judges or bad prosecutors. And then they go back into the street and they commit more violent crimes and take lives that should never have been taken. That's where I'm frustrated.
Well,
And I'm frustrated that the laws that I see coming out, or prospective laws, bills, seem to be more concerned about what the law-abiding citizens are doing or how many rounds they have in their magazines than it does what's actually happening in our streets.
Yeah, that was sort of my point. When I say 96 out of 103 arrests were nollied or dismissed, means they weren't prosecuted. And that's what your frustration is. So thanks for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Comment or question from members of the committee? Comment or question? Seeing none, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for your time.
Mr. Liska, we tried you and you had very interesting issues with your computer. We'll give you that one more shot. All right, Mr. Liska. Okay, well, all right. Well, that brings us to the end of this public hearing. Thank you very much for joining us. We will see.
Just out of colleges to the NIH world, the renowned campus in Maryland. NIH research leads to save lives. That's why I'm once again trying to pass a resolution pledging just basic bipartisan support for NIH. This resolution is simple. It says the work of NIH should not be subject to interruption, delay, or funding disruptions in violation of the law. And it reaffirms the workforce of NIH is essential to sustaining medical progress. For kids like DJ, for people like my friend Brian Wallach, who's fighting ALS, for every family out there dealing with life-threatening diagnoses, we must not stay silent in the face of Donald Trump and Elon Musk's assault on medical research. I will never stop fighting to protect NIH and the medical research it supports. I hope that it will become, once again, a bipartisan effort. And so, as this session, I ask unanimous consent, the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and